Chair, council members, and participants are now live.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair, for having this hearing. Looking forward to a productive conversation today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning.
Councilmember Quinones Sanchez.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome, everyone.
Morning.
Councilmember Brooks.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning.
Councilmember Squilla.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning.
And Councilmember Jones.
Okay. Thank you. A quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Councilmember Gim at this time. The council member is not a member of the committee, but as a sponsor of one bill before this committee today, she has been invited to make comments during the hearing and ask questions of witnesses. The council member will not take part in the public meeting at the conclusion of the public hearing. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless regarding bill numbers 200414, 200420, and 200421. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to everyone viewing at home for tuning in. We're here today to hear testimony amendments to the bills that comprise the Emergency Housing Protection Act. The EHPA, which I introduced with my colleagues, Council Members Gim and Brooks, was signed into law by Mayor Kinney on July 1st. This package of bills protects Philadelphia's renters from eviction and late fees and offers mandatory hardship repayment plans to facilitate the long-term payment of back rent for those currently unable to pay as a result of COVID-19 related income loss. The proposed amendments to the EHPA extend the timeline for these protections. As the pandemic continues with no end in sight, and as we head towards what is being called the third wave of infection across the country, it is urgent that Philadelphia residents can remain safe and healthy in their homes without risk of eviction. There is no overstating how urgent the issue of housing insecurity is right now. Before this crisis even began, Philadelphia had the fourth highest eviction rate in the country. 1 out of 14 of our renters face eviction each year. And this is a crisis that is concentrated in communities of color. Black renters are twice as likely to get evicted as white renters, and 70% of people evicted from their homes are women of color. On top of that, consider the disparate economic and health impacts that COVID-19 is having on our communities of color. The Bureau of Labor Statistics recently reported that Philadelphia's August unemployment rate was 15.4%. That's up from just 6.4% in August of 2020. And we know that job losses are concentrated in the low end of the wage distribution among workers who are more likely to be Black or Latino and who are more likely to rent their homes. And on top of this, Black Philadelphians and Hispanic Philadelphians contract COVID-19 at 1.8 times the rate of white Philadelphians. So with all this in mind, protecting our city's renters isn't just an acknowledgement that housing is a human right. It's intentional action to counteract the insidious effects of structural racism. And unless we extend the EHPA, Black and brown Philadelphians will bear the brunt of an unprecedented wave of evictions once Philadelphia's municipal court allows them to resume on November 8th. This legislation keeps vulnerable residents housed and safe, ensures landlords get paid, and reduces the strain on city resources like homeless services and our hospital system. I want to take a moment to give a brief overview of each of the bills we'll be considering today. Bill number 200414, introduced by Councilmember Gim, extends the eviction moratorium through December 31st of this year. This ensures adequate time for renters to seek rental assistance with the cooperation of their landlord and seek additional means of income, all the while maintaining shelter to stay safe from COVID-19. Bill number 200421, which I introduced, will extend the mandatory repayment plan program until the end of this year, meaning that even if you lost your job after August 31st, you could still take advantage of this option. The program allows renters experiencing financial hardship to establish a 9-month repayment plan to pay off back rent, ending no later than September 30th of next year. And Bill number 200420, introduced by Councilmember Brooks, extends the late fee waiver until September 31st of next year. The long and short of it is that these amendments extend the timeline for laws that are already on the books. We did not know how long the pandemic would last when we first introduced the EHPA in the spring. I'm grateful to my colleagues on the Housing Committee for championing the initial legislation, and this unprecedented health and economic crisis for our city today demands another strong response from this legislative body. Thank you. Are there any other members who would like to make opening comments?
Councilmember Brooks.
Councilmember, go ahead.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson was in queue.
Oh, I'm so sorry. 1 second. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, colleagues. I just had a brief point of clarification regarding the orders of the day upon reviewing the witness list. I wanted to know, for the record, if we will have anyone to testify regarding the assistance available not only to tenants, but also to landlords, so we can prevent homelessness in our city. So for the record, I just wanted to know if Eva Gladstein, our Deputy Managing Director of Health and Human Services, or anyone from her office will be on this call to respond to any of the questions that we have around preventing homelessness and using some of the CARES dollars to ensure that we can keep people in their homes and housed during this time.
Sure. Greg Heller is here from the administration to testify about rental assistance and other resources available to renters and landlords.
Absolutely. That I do understand, Madam Chair. But my specific point of clarification around the orders of the day is that I don't see Eva Gladstein on this witness list. And I think it's important that we have her on this hearing to talk about the administration's commitment to homelessness prevention and helping those that need to stay in their homes. Okay. I think that is important. And if we could get Eva here on the record, I think that would be most helpful for this hearing.
We're happy to reach out.
Okay. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues, for your indulgence.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Hi, Councilmember.
I just want to, for the record, be recognized that I am here.
Good, and good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, Councilmember Brooks.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair. Yesterday, the city reported 268 cases of COVID-19 and 18 deaths. Currently, the doors of our school remain closed, unemployment remains high, violence plagues our neighborhoods, and food insecurity is an ongoing challenge. The pandemic has transformed everything about our daily lives for over 7 months now. And we can expect that to continue at least through the winter. Some experts have attributed the rising number of cases across the city, the state, and the country to a sense of pandemic fatigue. Pandemic fatigue is when community members relax their social distancing, wearing masks, and traveling practice because of a sense of exhaustion that this crisis has caused. But contrary to how tired we feel and how eager we may be to return to normal life, now more than ever, we need to be focused on keeping our communities healthy. As cold weather approaches and many of our already cost-burdened renters struggle to make ends meet, we need to extend this Emergency Housing Protection Act so that we can keep Philadelphians safe and in their homes. We need to make sure that communities of color, which have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, are not thrown into an even greater
Member,
Yeah. Hello?
we're having a very hard time hearing you. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It sounds clear to me, so I'm thinking it might be on your end.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
All right, I will finish up real quick. We need to make sure that our community members are not amassing more and more debt as a result of fees that they have they won't be able to recoup over time or recover. We need to maintain the systems in place that stabilize renters while also ensuring that landlords eventually get paid. This past summer, the members of the Housing Committee stood together to say that a massive wave of eviction and homelessness during the worst health and economic crisis of our lifetime was unacceptable. You all stood up for the most vulnerable constituents and protected their right to housing. Now we're asking you again to advocate on the behalf of thousands of renters who remain in dire need of your support. I want to thank you all in advance for your advocacy and your dedication to this issue. I conclude, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No problem.
Councilmember Kim, you had a point of clarification?
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee and especially to my council sponsors on the reinstatement, actually, of the eviction moratorium. There is no extension of the eviction moratorium because none currently exists. So I just want to be clear because I want to get quickly to the hearing. I asked that the members of the committee will be hearing many things today. And I think it's important to know that it's not necessarily all predictable. I want to be clear that the eviction moratorium is the same bill as was passed unanimously by our council body last spring. It's the same bill because the public health risks that evictions pose to all of us, and especially to the most vulnerable among us and vulnerable renters, still persist in this moment. It's not different. And it never did limit it to just those who experience COVID-related hardships. It was a COVID bill because as was back then, we are still at what we would consider to be at the height of a pandemic that has overwhelmingly impacted vulnerable Philadelphians, especially Black and Brown Philadelphians, who are among those who are most at risk. We'll hear testimony today about what the health risks are for mass evictions that have been seen in other states that have lifted eviction moratoriums. We will take a look and hear from individuals who can talk about the challenges that have gone on with the courts. Certainly since the eviction moratorium was instated last spring, our office has not stayed still. We've tried to do everything to see if we can ensure that programs that were established can be funded, that our courts can be good partners with us on this. And this is where we are. It's not meant to just be the easiest decision. It's meant to be an important decision and a right one. And so I hope that as we go into this conversation, we'll be able to listen about why we instituted a moratorium across the board on evictions last spring and why we also need one right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss, will you please read the titles of the bills?
Yes. Bill number 200414, an ordinance amending chapter 9-800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Landlord and Tenant to address matters related to the landlord and tenant relationship during the novel coronavirus of 2019 pandemic, including providing for temporary eviction relief and making certain technical changes, all under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 200420, an ordinance amending chapter 9-800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Landlord and Tenant to address matters related to the landlord and tenant relationship during the novel coronavirus of 2019 pandemic, including providing for the temporary waiver of certain fees and making certain technical changes, all under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 200421, an ordinance amending chapter 9-800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Landlord and Tenant to address matters related to the landlord and tenant relationship during the novel coronavirus of 2019 pandemic, including providing for repayment agreements and making certain technical changes, all under certain terms and conditions.
Thank you. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Before we call witnesses, we're going to show a short news clip which shows what eviction looks like during a pandemic. Allison, will you please play the video?
Yes.
Hello? Constable, need to come to the door.
From one Houston home to the next,
Hello, Constable.
Deputy Benny Gant with the Harris County Constable's Office executes judge's orders to evict.
Hello, Constable.
We ain't got nowhere to go.
Israel Rodriguez is the tenant at this apartment, but he's not alone. 20-month-old Israel, his brother, 4-year-old Fabian, and their mother are some of the estimated 40 million Americans facing eviction in the downward spiral of the COVID economy.
It ain't rushes, but they're like, get everything you need.
Rodriguez admits he hasn't been paying rent, behind thousands of dollars.
It's my fault in the eviction. There was a lot going on during the corona. When it hit, I lost my job. So it took me like a month to get another job. This is my check, but I ain't making it with $300. It's literally $300.
Their stroller now carries their possessions.
It's mainly the kids' clothes because me and her wear the same clothes almost every day. Make sure we got, toilet paper and a little bit of snacks for the kids.
What are you going to do with all of your stuff?
That's trash. They can throw it in the trash because we don't have a car. We don't have help. We don't have nobody that can come, help us out right now. Nobody. We got ourselves, me and the kids and her. That's it.
How does you as law enforcement feel about seeing that family have to go?
Oh, that's a tough situation. I've got 6 kids, 6 children. And, the kids see the mom and dad in desperate situation. It's tough.
Deputy Gant, an officer for 35 years, is just starting his day. 8 evictions are on his list.
A co-defendant is here, 2 of them.
At each stop, people behind on rent are ordered to leave. Possessions pulled out. Where are you guys going to go now?
I'm going to the hotel.
You can go to a hotel. As Deputy Gant works through his list, we get word that 200 eviction orders have come through the Harris County courts for this week. That's double what they normally saw for an entire month before COVID. 200 on Monday. What does that?
Well, that's a lot, yeah.
What does that say to you?
Well, what that means is that they're ready to start having people removed from properties.
It is a backlog, but it's also just one precinct in one of America's hardest hit cities in evictions. The job takes its toll.
I don't really want to put her out here, but I have to under this judge's order.
At this apartment, the tenant is an elderly woman who can no longer afford the rent. The landlord's mover, Francisco Munoz, works, though he doesn't want to.
I have a family, I have a sister, I have my mom, and we never know. Maybe today is her, tomorrow's me,
Midway through the eviction, Deputy Gant decides it's too dangerous to evict her in the Houston summer heat.
I'm not going to put her out here in this heat.
And will call social services instead.
You stay today, but tomorrow you're leaving.
A one-day reprieve with an uncertain tomorrow.
You have a situation where people aren't working, they don't have money, and they're desperate.
Thank you, Allison. I've seen that video several times, and it still impacts me the same way each time. Thank you. Mr. Weiss, will you please call the first panel or witness we have to testify this morning?
Yes. The first panel is Demetria Sanders, Dr. Alice Stanford, Catherine Leifheit, Rude Landau, and Shapri Kelly.
Okay. Good morning, Demetria. Are you connected and ready to proceed? Is Demetria Sanders on?
I think she's muted.
Yeah, she's on. She's muted.
Is there a way to unmute her?
You can hit *6 to unmute, please.
Demetria, can you hit *6 to unmute? Maybe we'll try to give Demetria some assistance, and in the meantime, move on to Dr. Stanford.
I think Demetria just got unmuted.
Okay.
Hello, okay.
Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Demetria Sanders, and I would like to say good morning to everyone again. I am actually one of the 20 million renters across the country currently at risk of eviction. I am a tenant at 4800 block of Oxford Avenue since 2018. I am also a member of Renters United of Philadelphia. We organize and educate renters to fight for our rights. My building is owned by MCM Management Solutions, a New Jersey-based corporate landlord which has 466 apartments across 7 city councils districts. Their own apartment buildings are in Germantown, all across the city, Germantown, Tacony, Cobbs Creek, Frankfurt, Northwood, Albany, West Philadelphia, and also in North Philadelphia. I am here today to share my story about the challenges that I have faced during this pandemic before there was an Emergency Housing Protection Act. I am blessed to be a member of Renters United. Otherwise, I would have been put out in the streets. I am also here to ask all other council members, especially my district council member, Maria Sanchez, to vote yes on all 3 extensions to this Emergency Housing Protection Act before the Housing Committee today. As of this time, I'm barely not working because of this pandemic. I am a one-on-one caretaker for people with mentally disabilities and school bus attendant also. This means that I take care of people and make sure that they get what they need to get to their appointments and take care of their errands. It's been a roller coaster ride between March and now. I have lost my family to this virus. I have lost and buried them. And as a result of that, I have been having mental health issues, a lot of anxiety, and losing sleep through this pandemic. And I'm coping with this by the grace of God and trying to motivate myself by trying to find a new job. But the situation is getting serious, and I have to work to pay my bills in cases are rising all over the city, all over. In April, I had got a notice on my door from my landlord from MCM Management saying that I had a default on my lease for not paying rent. That means we're planning to file an eviction against me so they can be a hearing as soon as the courts reopen. And I couldn't believe they wanted to evict me during this pandemic, and this is serious. That was a smack in my face because I'm a good tenant. I'm always paying my rent on time. And then in the beginning of May, I got a notice from MCM saying that I had to leave by the end of June because they were not renewing my lease. Even before this pandemic, I was a member for Renters United of Philadelphia, which was a blessing to me, a blessing. When this letter and then this renewal notice arrived to me, I fought to keep my place in my home and enforce our collective COVID-19 demands by negotiating an agreement with MCM. I was able to get a lease renewal with no rent increase, a payment plan for back rent I owed, and my late fees canceled. But not everyone is part of renters movement like me. And extending the Emergency Housing Protection Act will help so many other people who are backed up on their rent and their late fees since March. A lot of people are scared right now, very scared. And they're scared to come forward for their demands for their rights. Right now, I'm requesting my demands. My demands today is we need to vote yes on this eviction moratorium, late fee waivers, and payment agreement is extension. We need city councils and landlords to work with our tenants so they can have a home. Your home makes you feel at ease and comfortable and safe. It's not a home. You're constantly worried about being put out in the streets. That's all I got to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your testimony. Dr. Stanford, can you state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Good morning. My name is Dr. Ayla Stanford. I am a pediatric surgeon, founder of the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium. I'm a native Philadelphian. I'm a wife and a mother. And to the woman who just spoke, I'm holding back tears after listening to what you said and also watching that video, and the information that I'm going to present, I believe supports emphatically that people should not be removed from their homes right now. With coronavirus, they've already had the floor removed from them. Don't take their ceiling. Why was the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium formed? It was formed because in our city of Philadelphia, 52% of the deaths were African Americans. 52% when we represent 44% of the population. That is also true for the Latinx community, also higher than white Americans in our city, and that is true throughout the nation. So what we did as a group of volunteer medical health professionals is we set up mobile testing units in all of the hardest hit zip codes. So on phila.gov, where they were listed, you could see where the positivity rates were. And initially, when I reached out to the city to say, hey, Black people, Latinx folks are dying every day higher than everyone else, what's being done? There was nothing that was done quickly as I felt it needed to be done. So we went to church parking lots, street corners, parks, wherever labor unions, wherever the people were, so that we could test them. And sure enough, the positivity rates at times were as high as 24%, 25, almost 1 in 4 people. And now in October, I am having stress because it feels like April again. As we're testing people, and last night we were in Maria Quinona Sanchez's district at Esperanza in North Philly, Hunting Park, North 5th Street. And prior to that, we were at the playground, Hunting Park Rec Center. The cases are going up again, sometimes 10% when we test. Facts, 221,000 deaths from coronavirus in the United States. African Americans represent 13% of the population, 21% of the deaths. In some cases, it's even higher. Other facts, if there's not death, there's more diagnoses, which mean the people who survive have residual symptoms, which means they cannot work and be productive. I'm not sure if you were aware, but the CDC put out a report last month that said of the children who died from coronavirus, 78% of them were Black and Latino. And 33% of them died at home. These are some of the facts that we're not hearing. Of the healthcare workers who died, 1,270, 60% of them were healthcare workers of color. The only thing we have right now is testing and contact tracing. There's no cure. We have supportive management. There is no vaccine. I focus in the present in the tools that we have right now. Do we want those things? Yes, but this is what we're working with. Our statistics, because at this point we have tested almost 12,000 people in the city of Philadelphia. We've analyzed our data with the University of Pennsylvania. We have tested 87% African American, 10% white, and 3% Latinx. Of those people, the 3 statistically significant things to have a COVID diagnosis are 1, being Black, 2, being Latino, and age. And guess what you think that age might be? All along, you've been hearing our elderly citizens, our nursing home residents, our healthcare workers. No. Our data shows that the age that you're more likely to be diagnosed with a positive diagnosis is if you're less than 65 and you're less than 18. So who is that? It's the most productive people in our society. It's the working people that are paying the rent. It's the working people that are dying and getting sick. It's the working people that have young children who are also being diagnosed with the disease. It's working people that don't have pensions. They don't have paid time off to pay their rent. So again, the highest rate of people we've seen positive, 45 to 54, 26 to 34, 35 to 44. Those are the ones being diagnosed. And when we tested them, they had health insurance. 33% of them had symptoms. So what does that tell you? That the barriers that existed for them to get tested, remember, all we have is testing and contact tracing, is what prevented them from getting a test and what allowed them to continue to transmit the disease that is already more prevalent, not because they had more comorbid conditions, because our data also showed that most of them did not have comorbid conditions. So let's look at it again. They're younger. They had fewer comorbid conditions. They had symptoms, but they couldn't get tested. Why? The hours were when they were working. They weren't on weekends. When they showed up with their children, children could not be tested. They needed a state-issued ID. They had to have a copay, and they needed a referral. All things that we did not require, and we tested the children. And so what happened? Our rates go up and go up. The disease spreads and spreads. People continue to die. People continue to have anxiety and stress and depression and not wanting to get up every day. Why? Because this is one day closer to losing my home, which is the only sense of peace and solace that I have. The families are falling apart. We're doing flu shots now. Oh my gosh. The flu by itself last year without a pandemic killed 35,000 people in the United States. So now we're going to couple the flu with coronavirus. And for people who are already on one foot, they're not going to make it. So as healthcare workers, we've got to do our part. That's why we're doing the flu shots, to keep their immune system as strong as we can. In these colder months, you know it's going to go up, and people are forced to be inside. If they're forced to be inside, then the virus is going to spread more and propagate, again, affecting our communities. In the United, yes, and I got to say the final thing, because you said 1.2 greater. In the nation, it's 3 times greater that Black Americans are dying at a rate higher than whites. It would be inhumane, it would be irresponsible to put people out right now. I thank you for your time. I apologize for the limit. I wrote all these notes, none of which I said, but I hope you got the point with the facts to support my suggestion, opinion, and recommendation. Thank you.
No apologies needed. Thank you so much for your powerful testimony and for your work, your very important work. Catherine, are you on and connected?
Yes, hello.
Hello. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. And I'm going to ask that folks, please limit testimony to 3 to 5 minutes.
Sure. My name is Catherine M. Leifheit. So thank you to the council members for allowing me to testify in support of the bills today. And thank you to my co-panelists, Dr. Stanford and Ms. Sanders, for showing the human consequences of today's hearing. The stakes really are huge. So I'm an epidemiologist and a postdoctoral fellow at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. My research seeks to elucidate connections between housing insecurity and population health. The views expressed here are my own and do not necessarily reflect the policies or positions of the University of California. Over the past several months, I've been conducting research to measure the effects of COVID-19 related eviction moratoriums on population health outcomes. In this research, we compare COVID incidence and mortality between states that lifted their moratoriums to states that maintained them, controlling for testing rates, mask ordinances, stay-at-home orders, school closures, underlying time trends, and also characteristics of the states. Preliminary data from our analyses show that the states that lifted their moratoriums had significantly higher COVID incidence and mortality rates 3 and 7 weeks after lifting, respectively. COVID incidence was between 1.1 and 1.5 times higher in states that lifted their moratoriums compared to states that did not. Mortality was between 1.4 and 2.1 times higher. We presume that these increased rates are due to mounting displacement, crowding, and COVID-19 transmission as evictions were allowed to proceed. Based on these results, my co-authors and I concluded that eviction moratoriums should be an important part of municipal, state, and national efforts to control the spread of COVID-19 and prevent deaths from the virus. However, the public health rationale for eviction moratoriums does not stop there. A large and growing body of evidence suggests that eviction is damaging to human health in ways that extend far beyond COVID-19. Among adults, evictions have been associated with several interrelated conditions, including all-cause mortality, emergency department utilization, sexually transmitted infections, HIV, treatment outcomes, drug use, exposure to violence, depression, mental health hospitalization, and suicides. My doctoral dissertation was focused on the effects of eviction on child health, in part because households with children face a high risk of eviction. Together with colleagues, I found that eviction during pregnancy was associated with increased odds of delivering a baby preterm or low birth weight. We found that when children are evicted, they're more likely to become food insecure, to test positive for lead poisoning, and to fall behind cognitively. These conditions all have real consequences for children's health in the short term, but also their health and prosperity as they grow into adults. To summarize, scientific evidence suggests that if evictions are allowed to proceed unchecked in Philadelphia, this would worsen the city's COVID-19 epidemic. Because eviction risk is not distributed equally, unnecessarily illness and deaths would fall upon those households already disproportionately burdened by COVID-19. Black and Latinx Philadelphians, essential workers, and low-income families with children. Sadly, we would not expect the damages to end there. Mass evictions now may cast a long shadow on health and health equity in Philadelphia, putting the city's most disadvantaged citizens at an increased risk of death and a downward health trajectory for years to come. For these reasons, I urge the City Council to do all in its power to prevent evictions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Rue Landau, are you on and connected?
I am here. Can you see me?
Yes. State your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. So good morning, and thank you to Chair. I'm Rue Landau, Executive Director of the Philadelphia Fair Housing Commission, and we are the agency that enforces the Fair Housing Ordinance that will be amended by these bills. Good morning, and thank you to Chairperson Gauthier and members of the Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless Committees for the opportunity to testify today in support of Bills 200414, 420, and 421 as amended. I also want to thank Council Members Gim and Brooks and all co-sponsors of these bills. Before I get started, I also want to take 1 second to thank my co-panelists. Your testimony was incredible. And Dr. Sanford, we feel you. Thank you for everything that you're doing in Philadelphia's neighborhoods to keep particularly our Black and Brown residents and neighbors safe and healthy. On May 29th, 2020, I came before you to testify in support of your original emergency COVID housing bills. At that time, you were pursuing an urgent and necessary pause on evictions that included a structure for people who were experiencing COVID-related hardships to repay certain past due rent. These bills passed on June 18th, 2020, and were signed into law by the mayor on July 1st, 2020. The new laws are commonly known as the Emergency Housing Protection Act, which I will use to refer to them today. By all measures, your efforts to delay evictions during this global pandemic were successful. The pandemic and accompanying economic crisis have created a devastating financial hardship for thousands of Philadelphians who are struggling with a loss of income. Not surprisingly, the crisis has taken the greatest toll on low-income communities of color. During the pause in evictions that was created by the EHPA, we were all very hard at work. The Fair Housing Commission, the Department of Planning and Development, and tenant advocates, and some landlord representatives created new forms, web pages, and intake systems for our work, all while conducting outreach and education to tenants and landlords in multiple languages. By September 1st, Planning and Development miraculously, in a short period of time, created a full eviction diversion program and a hub for rental assistance that is paid directly to landlords. And by mid-September, the Fair Housing Commission promulgated emergency regulations for the EHPA. This collective work led to many cases being diverted from municipal court and allowed landlords and tenants to enter into repayment agreements through the new diversion program. The program just started in September and needs additional time to reach its full effectiveness, especially since it's instrumental in helping to get landlords and tenants connected to the rental assistance program. The new bills before you today will give us that additional time and add some new provisions. Overall, the new bills extend the date by which a landlord can proceed with an eviction to collect late fees, extends the date by which a landlord can proceed with an eviction or collect late fees, and creates new timeframes for repayment agreements for tenants suffering COVID-related hardships. specifically, the bill that ends in 414 extends the time in which landlords are prohibited from filing or proceeding with an eviction until December 31st, 2020. For commercial tenants, the bill covers small businesses and those who provide a certification of a COVID-related hardship. The bill maintains the important exception for evictions that are necessary to resolve an imminent threat of harm. Bill ending in 420 waives all late fees and fines from any past due rent from March 1st until September 30th, 2021 for tenants who suffered a COVID-related financial hardship. And the bill ending in 421 amends the mandatory rent repayment agreement for tenants who suffered a COVID-related financial hardship and have been unable to pay rent for any time between March 1st until December 31st, 2020, as follows. Under the new bill, the certification of hardship can be either one, the signed declaration necessary for the CDC eviction moratorium, or a written certification of hardship that we've already had, including that includes the tenant's loss of income with supporting evidence, if available. If a tenant has already entered into a repayment agreement with their landlord under the terms of the original EHPA, there's no extension. All past due rent must be paid by May 31st, 2021. For tenants entering into repayment agreements on or after this bill becomes law, the tenant must pay any past due rent by September 30th, 2021. All repayment agreements still follow the existing rubric. Tenants must pay their full rent each month, plus the lesser of the total past due rent divided by 9 months, divided by 9, or 30% of their full monthly rent with any remainder paid by the deadline. If a tenant fails to pay their ongoing rent or 3 months of their back rent, their landlord can proceed to court. And finally, during the repayment period, the landlord cannot reduce the agreement to a judgment or terminate the lease unless the landlord provides the tenant with a specific 30-day notice and the eviction is based on non-payment of ongoing monthly rent. The Fair Housing Commission has created a sample notice for landlords. Any violations of these bills is considered an unfair rental practice under the Fair Housing Ordinance, and parties can file complaints with our office. Not surprisingly, we've seen a dramatic increase in cases since the EHP was passed. While we don't have a large staff, we are dedicated to enforcing the law and ensuring the fairness is delivered as efficiently as possible. These bills strike the right balance of continuing to allow vulnerable tenants to secure the time and money they need to become current in the rent, while also helping landlords receive ongoing monthly rent, as well as a portion of rent owed, so that they can keep tenants in their units and avoid the cost of eviction. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you so much for your partnership as well. Is Shapri on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you state your name for the...
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Point of information, if I could.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you for your testimony, and always a pleasure to hear from you, colleague. I'm asking this question as a commissioner on the Pennsylvania Human Relations, and I should probably know the answer of this, but is there redress under this bill once it's passed to both your organization but also the Commonwealth?
So this bill amends, remember I oversee 2 commissions, the Commission on Human Relations and the Fair Housing Commission. These bills amend the Fair Housing Ordinance, which is the Fair Housing Commission. I have some interesting thoughts going forward that I'm just starting to work out in my head about ways in which we can pass this over to our respective commissions, and I'm happy to talk to you about that. It's about fairness and justice and equity.
Madam Chair, we pay a great deal of attention to the Philadelphia Human Relations Commission as Pennsylvania Human Relations Commissioner. I just want, for the record, people to know she is our rock star.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I see there are questions for the panel. I'm going to let this last witness go, and then I'll open up for questions for anyone on the panel. Shapri, if you could state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for allowing me to talk. My name is Shapri Kelly. I am a single mother of 3, and currently we are actually homeless. We were forced out of our home in the 7,000 block of Breland Street, which is owned by Rowell Management, August 31st of this year. Like literally the day the moratorium was up, we had to leave. Honestly, this moratorium definitely needs to continue because I really don't want to hear any more stories like mine. I've already heard enough, and my story is already like, oh God, just sitting here trying to say this is just, it's a lot. Because right now, currently, I lost my job during the COVID. I ended up acquiring another job, but I can't work it as of yet because they're not opening due to COVID. I've been on unemployment since May, and I'm not even getting a regular check. I get a check maybe once a month from unemployment if I'm lucky. Me and my children are pretty much split between 3 houses. And I'm not even exactly sure when I'm going to be able to even put us together in a house again. Like this shouldn't be a reality for anybody. Nobody should have to wake up every day not knowing when they're going to be able to give their children a roof over their heads. Nobody should have had to wake up every day not knowing if the landlord that they were renting from was going to be at the door telling them they had to leave. And I know it wasn't just me because I've talked to other people that rented from the same landlord. They did the same thing to them. They liquidated half of their houses, if I'm not mistaken, August 31st. The house that I was in wasn't even really in livable condition, and they already had somebody else living in it. And it's sad. Oh God. Give me a second.
It's okay. It's okay.
But yeah, I just really wish that me being here and me telling my story can make sure that this doesn't happen to anybody else.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I'm so sorry to hear about the situation that you're in with your children. I see we have some questions for the panel. Councilmember Quinones Sanchez.
Good morning, and I want to thank everyone for being here this morning. Many of you we heard from the spring. Many of you I have the opportunity to work with all year long. To the Renters Alliance, who was recently funded to do some of this renters work. It's much needed area. It was a gap in sort of an area of organizing as we relate and try to deal with housing insecurity and definitely with some of the larger landlords. So I look forward to continuing our work to Dr. Stanford, who's been in Honey Park 2 days. We have her one more time next week. Last night when she shared some of the statistics that she shared with the group this morning, I was a little surprised at the data sets, particularly as it related to the children dying in this situation, and it really just kind of highlighted again, the misinformation sometimes about who is being impacted. And in fact, everyone is being impacted, every age group. And I appreciate the fact that we will continue to have her and her consortium. Rue, I always appreciate you. I think you are the expert on some of these issues. You've worked on it. One of my questions for you, we continue to advocate to the administration about ultimately getting us some money so that we can keep people in their homes and obviously keep landlords paid, so that we are not putting people in harm's way. You talked about the growing number of cases. I know that we're meeting around making sure the program works and working through the kinks and ultimately having, money, financial support at the end of it. Of the cases profiled in your portfolio, is there anything that sticks out to you that needs fixing, or the ability, what is it that in the profile of the cases that you're getting, and how can, as we improve and strengthen this program, because I know that we're going to be at this conversation in December, we're going to be at it next year, and one of the things we want to do is we want to build our programs that are sustainable and can get us through this recovery process. What is it that we need to be aware of?
That's a great question. Well, first, you will be hearing from Greg Heller of Planning and Development later, who's working on getting the funding to the tenants and the landlords. We started to hear hold hearings via Zoom, which is great. It's actually more difficult on our staff side, but kind of easier for the commissioners, to be honest with you. So we're doing them as much as possible. And the volume of cases coming in through intake is tremendous. We thankfully have 3 intake people now. We do not have a front desk receptionist. I'm going to be asking that position get filled. It's very hard to even take the phone calls off of the line. Doing this during COVID and not being around each other is very, very difficult, period. There's nothing you can do about that. Thank you for keeping us safe. But the volume of cases coming in is huge, and we can only just see it going up and up. What are they calling about? There are still, everything that happens in housing in the city is all this, a web of connections. So, for example, with our cases, even before these COVID cases, we rely on L&I inspections to be able to inspect properties, re-inspect properties to show that repairs have been made. We needed repair people to go into properties. When that all broke down because of COVID, we couldn't move our cases forward and caused, there might be landlords who should be getting paid by tenants. There might be tenants who needed to get a rent abatement. It was very complicated. Making sure, we have to all be safe and we have to have our systems working will help move these cases along a little bit faster. And then the final answer is that there's just, the largest thing is there's just a tremendous need to make housing more affordable, to get landlords to make repairs to their properties, and then to keep people in their properties. It's beyond the Fair Housing Commission. I appreciate your question so much. We thankfully also were able to hire a lawyer in February just before that happened, because that would be very difficult to handle if not. So the volume's huge. It's just going to get bigger. The cases, we are seeing some cases that are strictly EHPA cases. If a landlord issues a lease termination notice in violation of your laws, the case comes to us. Some of them we're doing on an administrative way to handle it. Well, the commissioners will issue an order by paper that it's clearly a violation. But some of the cases, a lot of them are coming in and they're hybrids. It's a good cause eviction case and an EHPA case. It's a regular unfair rental practice case and an EHPA case. So we have to have a whole hearing.
Thank you. Thank you, Ru. Thank you, Madam
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Jones, did you have a question? You don't?
Only if I could, under the current law and possible passed this law, tell me about the bed and breakfast. What are they called?
Limited lodging, Airbnbs.
Airbnbs.
We're having a problem, council person.
Yeah, I had and the reason why I was struggling, I had a constituent come in and say that someone came in under the guise of an Airbnb. And then as the eviction moratorium happened, they said and claimed that was tantamount to a lease. And they weren't leaving. How do you interpret? And I don't need for you, every case is different. So we're not trying to do case law on this hearing, but I'm struggling with what to tell owners about Airbnbs as it relates to this.
It's a great question, and I would love to examine this more closely with you because we're seeing the flip side of landlords who are claiming to have an Airbnb when they clearly have a tenant. And the person is a tenant. There's no doubt the person's a tenant, and they're saying, oh, no, it was just this limited lodging situation. The code does define limited lodging. I think we need to put more restrictions around that. Let's clearly define it. You can have an Airbnb, it's going to be one thing. And if not, it's a lease. You're a landlord. You have to, you've got certain responsibilities as a landlord that have to go forward.
We are boldly going where no law has gone before. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Council Member Bass, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask Dr. Stanford about where we are right now and really to draw a contrast as to where we could end up because, the city of Philadelphia, obviously, we already had a housing crisis before this even became, and we haven't even, we really have not taken a good look at what we're really dealing with in terms of the need for affordable and low-income housing in the city of Philadelphia. We haven't dealt with it. We had a hearing a few weeks ago on the matter, and I remember asking about what was the total universe. And I can't remember if it was Eva or someone else who answered, but who said that from what they were counting, and they were only counting people who were in shelters, and that number was around 5,000 or so. And that the folks who were on, let's say, a PHA wait list, which we know is, in the tens of thousands, that list was not considered. And so, this feels a little bit like we're trying to keep the dam from bursting and we've got our finger up against, like the crack in the dam. And so, it's a difficult position that we're in, a terrible position that we're in. And for the sake of making sure that we can contain COVID in the city of Philadelphia as much as we can, because our numbers had gone down. Our numbers were better, and now they're going back up. And so in an effort to make sure that we don't do anything that's even further damaging, I just wanted Dr. Stanford, if she would, to speak to how much worse this thing could be if we did not involve these protections, particularly for people who are affected by COVID, who have lost their employment, or for whatever other reason related to COVID, that they are, really jammed up right now. And what would the scenario look like for the city of Philadelphia beyond the current housing catastrophe that we have on our hands?
Can you all hear me okay? Yes. So one, thank you for the question. So obviously not having a place to socially distance and practice good hygiene. And now you have more people in the street, more people in shelters, more people staying with friends of friends is going to increase the transmissibility of the virus. That's going to happen even with people not losing their homes. So right now we're at 221,000 deaths, and I'm using deaths on purpose. But for how many deaths, there's over 5 million cases, right? And those folks don't always bounce back to be productive members of society. So right now, it's predicted if we stay as is, that is without any lockdown, without any closing the restaurants, keeping people allowing to travel as much as they want and things like that, that we could approach 400,000 deaths by March. And the reason being is it's been 8 months and we've got to 221, but that was when it was warmer outside. And now that it's going to be colder and people are inside, and now you've got a disease on top of a disease that weakens your immune system, that's only going to exacerbate the amount of disease, hospitalizations, and death. And so that's what we have coming. And the folks who are most affected, that is African Americans and Latinos and folks in poverty, it's only going to be worse because the reasons why they are affected have not gone away. So the inequities that are in the health system, the inequities that are in housing, inequities in schools with kids sitting outside of, Taco Bell to get Wi-Fi if their Chromebook works, all those things are not going away. And so in answer to your question, Councilwoman Bass, it's for those who are hurting, they will be hurting more. All of America will be. In Europe, they shut down everything. Everything is on a lockdown. And if you watch what happens for them over the next 6 weeks versus what happens to us over the next 6 weeks, you'll be able to see it for yourself. So we need to buckle in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Gim.
Yes, thank you so much. And, especially to this panel, Demetria and Cynthia, I just express so much gratitude to both of you for having the courage to tell your story. I know it cannot be easy to talk about all this difficulty and pain, and especially about what being homeless and separated from your children. It's, as a mom, as somebody who's been trying to figure these things out, it's incredibly painful, and we're trying to carry your stories with us as we do our work. Dr. Leifheit and to Dr. Stanford, I think you said so clearly about what the impact could be. And, I just kind of want to lay out a scenario. So we've got about 2,000 evictions that could go forward if the courts lift their eviction order on November 8th. Or their eviction moratorium on November 8th. There is no eviction moratorium right now in the city of Philadelphia, except for the ones that the courts are prohibiting right now. I mean, I think you talked about this, but, some of these people, as you noted, preceded COVID. They had financial problems beforehand. There's not a whole lot of rescue, that's in place. Can you talk to us about how, in your mind, is there a difference about whether they experienced their problems pre-COVID or during COVID, when we've got 2,000 of them that could potentially go on November 8th, and how it might impact your work? And maybe we can start with Dr. Stanford.
Okay. So you were asking, did people have, health conditions pre-COVID? I'm not sure.
They had a financial problem that existed during COVID, and then there might be protections for them, or if they're, financial, the money of the 2,000 people had problems that had financial issues that existed pre-COVID. Those are the ones that are in play as of November 8th. So if the eviction moratorium is lifted and those evictions go forward, does it make a difference about, when their conditions happened, or what does that mean to you as a doctor?
Sure. So it means that so many of the people we tested are exactly who you're talking about. They were the ones that financially were having issues because we didn't collect co-pays. Everything was free. Everything we offered was free to people who came. And for those who had insurance, we processed it, and that allowed us to continue to take care of the people who didn't have. That is until the CARES Act. So now if you add more people who are uninsured, most of the testing is done in our city hospitals. And unfortunately, if you don't have health insurance, some of our great institutions are not going to test you, period. You cannot get a test. So for folks like us that are mobile units, we're going to see a rise. We're already seeing a rise. As I mentioned earlier, it feels like April again to me, with the number of people that are lined up in cars, sitting outside in inclement weather. Last Friday, we were at Deliverance Church in the rain. People stood outside because they were giving away food. So it was their food giveaway day. And Commissioner Farley was there, and his eyes were, bulging out of his head to see people in the rain who walked from their neighborhoods to pick up fresh produce that the church was to also give flu shots and to also get a COVID test. And so the poverty, he asked the same question. Is this worse because of COVID? And my short answer is yes, it is.
Thank you. Dr. Leifheit, can you speak about how you've studied what happens in states that lift their eviction moratoriums and talked about the rise of both contracting COVID, but also COVID mortality. So one, I wanted to ask about how race plays into both increased likelihood of eviction and likelihood of contracting COVID. So we've got some data studies from the Reinvestment Fund that shows that COVID contraction and mortality is higher in neighborhoods that have a higher number of evictions associated with them. And so I'm curious about whether that plays out. And I know you put out numbers like 1.2, 1.4, but how does that translate into actual people? Like what numbers are we talking about?
Sure. So thank you, Council Member, for the question. So the first part of your question was about disparities. And we know that, I think all of the panelists made this case, people of color, people in low-income neighborhoods are more likely to be evicted than anyone else, especially women of color, single moms. And we also know that these are the same groups that are disproportionately affected by COVID, both incidence and mortality. So one research question that we have is what is the impact of lifting these moratoriums on disparities in COVID cases and also deaths? So we expect that because this exposure is concentrated in communities of color, we also expect that by displacing people who are disproportionately Black and Brown, you would be leading to increased cases and deaths in those communities. So by lifting a moratorium, we expect that disparities in COVID would increase. That being said, we haven't been able to look at it directly because a lot of states weren't reporting COVID data disaggregated by race, especially earlier in the epidemic. It's something that we want to look into, potentially looking at a subset of states that were reporting race-specific data. But I can't give an answer besides that we definitely expect it to broaden disparities. And then in terms of, so I did report the relative numbers. I'm trying to pull up, so this is a paper that's in review. And I can give you sort of absolute numbers that will be national. So we found that the lifting of the moratoriums on a national scale were associated with potentially about 65,000 excess cases and about 5,000 excess deaths. So that's to say, if you look nationally, if every state had maintained their moratorium, our models suggest that many cases and deaths could be averted. So it's a substantial number.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stanford, one other quick question. The way COVID works is that, it's not like, so the renter themselves might be evicted, but if they are at risk of COVID because they're in a shelter, it's not just them who's at risk. Is that correct? It's like a community spread that we're worried about. So in fact, the whole community gets put at risk, especially if we know that evictions are concentrated in particular zip codes and particular areas of the city.
Was there a question posed?
Yes. Could you talk to me a little bit about community spread? So the idea is that, the question before us is, we've got, say, 2,000 evictions that could be lifted as of November.
Sure.
Are you concerned that the zip codes in which those renters live, which overwhelmingly tend to be concentrated as opposed to spread out, that those communities could potentially be at greater risk if there's a higher rate of evictions in those areas?
Absolutely. I mean, we know what community spread is. Remember, with coronavirus, first it was person to person. That was a farce that was put out, that you had to be with someone who was from China. Remember that? And then it was, is it respiratory droplets? Is it airborne? And then back in February, that one gentleman walked through Central Station in New York. Remember the lawyer from Long Island? And all he had to do was walk in that train station, and hundreds of people were infected and contracted. So now it's cold, right? And you're going to put folks, as I mentioned before, staying with friends and relatives of friends and so forth. And that's going to spread. When they go to the grocery store, that means more people have it, right? So now it's back to April when 1 in 4 person had coronavirus. That's, you're getting on the bus, you're taking the subway, you're taking the train. That means statistically, of the people in the room, more people have it. In the grocery stores, in the pharmacy, in anywhere you're waiting, as I mentioned, on the train, on the bus, walking down the street. We know now in restaurants, and hopefully the restaurants are going to be closed soon, but in restaurants, it's actually not the person across the table, but the person sitting right next to you. Because if you have it, it falls on your shoulder, it falls on your shirt, or it's in the air and the person next to you. That's why our cases are going up now, because everybody wants to eat out and be served and waited upon. So to your point, will it spread, community? Absolutely. Absolutely. Just the science has shown us over and over. Even with masks, hand washing, how are you going to social distance? Again, it gets back to the recommendations that are put down globally in a condensed, densely populated environment. You can't follow those, you can't follow the same recommendations.
Thank you so much for all your work, Dr. Stanford, and thank you, Kate.
Thank you. We have Eva Gladstein, our Deputy Managing Director for Health and Human Services, joining us. I know that Councilmember Gilmore Richardson had some questions for Eva, so I want to give an opportunity for the council member to ask those questions, and then I ask that we move on to the next panel.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thank you, Eva, for your flexibility. Truly appreciate your availability. You're welcome. So my question is specifically around the individuals who are at risk of eviction. The emergency housing package was introduced in response to the COVID-19 emergency, okay? And I really appreciate my colleagues for all of their work and for their foresight and insight around this issue. But prior to COVID, there were individuals who were scheduled for eviction. And my colleagues are saying that it's 2,000 individuals at risk of eviction that happened prior to COVID. What type of revenue can we utilize for homelessness prevention for those individuals? That's my first question.
So because I jumped on with such short notice, I don't have all of the specific numbers in front of me, but the Office of Homeless Services has always had a prevention and diversion program, which it has continued to utilize, and they've increased the funding this year. I just, on the spur of the moment, can't give you exactly how much money they've allocated for that this year. They have used that. It's primarily very low income individuals who go there, and they've used that to help with security deposits, utility deposits, or maybe the first few months' rent. So they're continuing that program and serve thousands of people every year with that resource and try to prevent people from coming into the shelter system with that. And if we're able to do that, that's really a good thing.
Okay, so for the 2,000 individuals, what type of assistance can we help the 2,000 individuals with, particularly as it relates to the CARES Act, knowing that if we don't use it, we lose it?
Right, so I'm not sure what CARES funding you're talking about because there are multiple parts of it, but I would say that there are several things that we're doing already. The city for about 2 years now, or a little bit over 2 years, has had the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project. And I don't know if you've had CLS testifying at these hearings or not, but they are subcontract with the city to operate that program and have a number of other legal services partners. And so they are available to both, they're at the court offering tenants who have an eviction hearing services the same day in terms of representation, negotiating a better agreement, and helping navigate the court, which is a very difficult, confusing place for those who have not been there.
They're also providing full representation as well in some other cases where tenants are able to contact them earlier on. They're providing a hotline and a website and a number of other resources, including financial counseling. So that program, the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Program, continues, and that is one way that we are providing that support. Okay, so I want to drill down again on the CARES Act funding. If you could say, just for the record, out of all the dollars that we have been allocated, how much has been utilized to prevent homelessness in Philadelphia, specifically related to COVID-19 hardship relief? Okay, I cannot speak about any of the resources that, because there are CARES dollars that have gone, that are CDBG related. There's a more general funding pot, which we call COVID Relief Fund, CRF, which the Recovery Office is managing. The only CARES-specific funding that the Office of Homeless Services has received is something called the Emergency Solutions Grant. They did receive 2 different tranches of that. However, the first tranche, which was $29 million, their entire general fund was reduced by $29 billion. So that was a wash, and they had to put those resources into shelter beds, which is also keeping people off the street, and other, necessary meeting basic needs, feeding people, etc. For the second tranche, which was $12.9 million, another $4 million was removed from that of general fund. So at the end of the day, and this is money that's available for 2 years, they have about $11 million over 2 years of new money. They're actually, due to some of the requirements of that funding, they're actually using a different state grant primarily, but I can go back and double check and provide counsel with the information on homelessness prevention. They're primarily spending that money on new lower cost housing alternatives. And some of you have read about some of those in the newspapers. So that includes the tiny house village. It includes expanding rapid rehousing. It includes expanding what we call a shallow rent program, where we're subsidizing people for $600 a month for a period of time, and they're paying $200 a month for rent. And it also includes the shared housing program that we've done with Planning and Development and the Housing Authority, where there's a very, very modest rent, and low or no income tenants can just pay 30% of that income towards that. And we've created, I don't know how many bedrooms, because some of this will be shared housing of 3 individuals, but we have 35 former PHA properties that are part of that program. There are, and also single room occupancies. So we're also trying to create more opportunity for people, again, to live in single room occupancy dwellings, commonly known as SROs, and increasing capacity, because that's very low cost. People would have their own rooms, but would have communal space. And there are RFPs that have been out on the street for the last probably 4 to 6 weeks for all of those programs, and we've begun contracting for them as well. Yes, I just wanted to thank you so much for those responses. And I just wanted to go back to the 2,000. Is there any way that you all track the 2,000 individuals to see what type of assistance they may need? No, but I actually, based upon a conversation I had with Councilmember Sanchez at the end of the day yesterday, I said that we would be we don't have the actual list, but I understand that Community Legal Services in turn have pulled that data and have reached out to them and to try to go back in to see if with the PEP program, the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project, we can do additional outreach to support those individuals. I know they've already done outreach, but I want to check to see if more can be done. Sure, no, I appreciate that response because I am very concerned about this. One, because the Emergency Housing Protection Act was introduced in response to COVID-19 and COVID-19 related hardships, okay? And then we have the 2,000 individuals that have been, affected or impacted by potential evictions prior to COVID-19. So now that there's an opportunity to assist with homelessness prevention and ensuring that we can keep these people healthy and housed, how are we doing that? Like, we literally need to just go to the list, find the 2,000 people, figure out how we can help those individuals, because I don't want to put any additional funding in jeopardy for some of the other communities that do need assistance, because some of the definitions or language specifically in the legislation that we are deliberating on today does not specifically state that it's COVID-19 related, relative to the legislation, and in turn the relief that we may need to offer to some of the other folks that have been adversely impacted by this, like the really small landlords, who some of them help us with the affordable housing units that are naturally occurring in our housing market, right? Something that the city doesn't subsidize and that we don't add to as it relates to affordable housing that's been on the books for years and years and years. So I just want to be real clear about that, because if we have an opportunity here to help 2,000 people with federal dollars, we should be doing that so that we make sure we don't jeopardize any funding that may be available to the really small folks who need help to keep, affordable housing on the rolls in our city. Because we know at this point, any affordable housing that goes off the market in the city of Philadelphia, we will never get it back. If an individual loses that property, the tenant will have to leave. And 9 times out of 10, an investor or someone else will purchase that property, and it'll never be back on the rolls for affordable housing in the city ever again, the way our real estate market is moving. So I just want to make sure we're doing all that we can for the 2,000 individuals, but also ensuring that as we deliberate this legislation, that we make sure we can help as many people as possible who need assistance. I just want to make sure with the 2,000 people that we can look at the funding there to ensure we can help the most vulnerable.
Excuse me, I just wanted to interrupt on 2 quick things. So, one, I wanted to just remind everyone that Greg Heller is on the next panel, and he is here specifically to talk about landlord assistance, and we can ask him to zone in on assistance to small landlords in particular. Secondly, I did want to just, point of fact, this package of bills was in response to COVID-19, but Councilmember Gim's eviction moratorium that was, broadly supported in this committee and throughout the rest of council was always a broad eviction moratorium with the thought that we needed to prevent evictions in the face of a global health pandemic. So I do want to make sure that we are not confusing that point.
No, and thank you for the clarification, but I do have a quick point of personal privilege, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure, though, that we do put on the record that we do have to try to help individuals. And yes, Greg is here. He's from another department than Eva. Eva has more control over homelessness prevention. And that's why I just wanted to get her on the record and her department on the record, because it could be potentially different pots of money that we need to access. And I just wanted to get that on the record. But thank you so much for your latitude, Madam Chair. Thank you, Eva.
And if I could just add a little bit more information. I mean, we have been working on the eviction crisis for many years pre-COVID. I personally have spent many years of my career being concerned about the eviction process and how the courts operate and the lack of information, training, and assistance for tenants, despite the fact that we have great partners such as Community Legal Services and other legal services organizations. Back in 2017, we created an eviction prevention and diversion task force. We had a set of recommendations coming out of that. We had a housing security group that helped kind of support that, and is continuing to work on the implementation of that with many action groups. Community Empowerment and Opportunity co-chairs that with Community Legal Services. that ongoing implementation. And we have great partners in a number of providers, legal services organizations, the Bar Foundation itself. So this is something that we've been working on pre-COVID and will continue to work on. And I just want to point out, it's not only the Office of Homeless Services, but many other players who are here. And so we appreciate your concern and agree.
Thank you for the line of questioning. And thank you, Eva, for getting on short notice. Thanks also for the hearing that we did a few weeks ago, digging into this. I appreciate the questioning, and I appreciate, the council member trying to go deep and see what assistance is available for people. But I think the real question that I'm hoping you can speak to is the city in any way prepared, the city and all of its agencies, whether it's OHS or others, prepared for 2,000 evictions, and what would the impact of that be on our work?
Yeah. Again, that's why we're trying to, we believe we're going to be creating between 900 and 1,400 new permanent supportive housing opportunities through the opportunities that I listed before that we're investing in right now. And we did that particularly because we thought there could be a surge in evictions, right? Post-moratorium, whenever that is, and, and depending upon other federal resources there. In terms of prevention, we were overwhelmed before COVID on prevention. And so I expect it to continue to be difficult. I think, for the Office of Homeless Services, they inherited a 30 or 40-year-old system that was based upon shelter. I think we all agree shelter is probably not the best option at all. It's less dignified than other forms of housing opportunity. And it's more expensive depending on how long people stay. But we have enough demand for shelter that we can't just unilaterally close those beds, although that's something that we've been working on in a more gradual pace in terms of looking at opportunities. So we've been trying to build out both the front end, which is prevention and diversion end, and build out the other end, which is housing opportunities for low or no income individuals. And I do want to point out that most of the affordable housing that's developed in the city is aimed at people who are of higher income than the people the Office of Homeless Services serves, right? So we're serving people whose income is maybe $10,000, ranging from $0 to $10,000 a year, something like that. And there are many people with needs, so I'm not blaming affordable housing developers, but they're serving people whose income, while it's still low, is higher than that in most cases. So we're trying to do our best to prepare for an onslaught of evictions. To talk about the 2,000 number, we've had years with 18,000 evictions a year, right? And it was going down slightly pre-COVID. We don't know, but we should assume that the number will go up after the moratorium. So we're trying to gear up for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Quinones Sanchez, did you have a question?
You asked Eva the question that I was asking was about what is the preparedness for the onslaught, because as Councilwoman Bass alluded to before, we're putting our hands on some, in a hole that eventually is going to open up. And even while, today's response is actually the closest you've gotten to telling us that we're more committed to that population, I guess, we are faced with, do we do a broad eviction or do we limit COVID? What are the two different funding streams so that we can take care of the 2,000 and then obviously prepare to deal with the others? You talked about you're aware that CLS and folks have canvassed the list of the 2,000. What is the time frame that you think you need to be able, and I know that those lists were outreach to, what is the amount of time you think you need for us to be able to touch base with those 2,000 people so that we're addressing that need as we move on with the COVID need?
Yeah. Well, I haven't discussed this yet because we just had the conversation last evening, obviously, council member. I haven't discussed it yet with our partners, but I would say 2 to 3 weeks. They did mail to everybody I know, and it was, and specifically trying to get out information about the CDC moratorium and to get into, like, we tried to do that very quickly, to get into tenants' hands the declaration that they could complete, which would act as a defense against an eviction for non-payment of rent. But I have to get in touch with our partners, see what the response rate was, and devise some other strategies for connecting with those individuals to see what their response rate has been over a period of time. So when we did this originally, it was really on a very short emergency basis, trying to get the declaration in people's hands at a time when we didn't know what the courts were going to do, and if they were going to continue to, if they were going to start to hold cases at the beginning of September, and whether or not they were going to hold off on serving writs. We now have a little bit more information about the court's actions. So I would say 2 to 3 weeks for us to work with our partners and come up with a game plan.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I think we have to move on to the next panel. I wanted to make an important point of clarification before we move on. We're talking about 2,000 households, right? We're talking about everyone who is in those households, including children. So I think we have to be very clear about that. Okay. Mr. Weiss, will you please call the next panel or a witness to testify?
Sure. Antonio Bowser, Professor Mike Levy, Brianna Westbrooks, Rashida Phillips, Greg Heller, and Matt Shoemaker.
Okay. Antonio, are you there and connected?
I think he needs to unmute by hitting *6.
Hello. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. And I'll just remind everyone, if you could keep your testimony to 3 minutes, that would be appreciated.
Good morning. This is Antonio Bowser, and thank you for this opportunity to address all of you today. My name is Antonio Bowser. I'm speaking in support of this bill in front of the committee that has extended parts of Emergency Housing Project Act. These bills would help protect our vulnerable renters and hopefully prevent other people from facing the situation I'm currently in. My cousin, my sister, and I lived in my old apartment together, but after my cousin passed away 2020 January, my landlord decided that he wanted us to move out over the summer. He informed us that he was not renewing our lease. We tried to discuss the matter with him, but his response, we got an eviction notice. With all the confusion about whether the courts would reopen and when when eviction notice was eviction court was starting again, we decided to move out to try to avoid filing for an eviction, because that would make it so much harder for me to find a place to move into the future. Because of this pandemic, I have not been able to find another place to move into. So I had to double up with some of my family members. I just celebrated my birthday 2 weeks ago. Even though it was good to celebrate with family, it would have been better to celebrate in my own place. So many people are at risk of being kicked out by their landlords with no place to go. Even though I'm lucky enough to have a family that was there for me, not everyone is. While I'm asking you to be there for everyone who don't have someone to be there for them and pass these bills. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your story today. Professor Mike Levy, are you there and connected?
I am.
Can you state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony, please?
Michael Levy, and I'll share a screen. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So I'm going to give some numbers to what's been discussed earlier, that evictions can increase the transmission of the virus that causes COVID-19. A lot of evicted families, like Antonio just mentioned, are able to double up, move in with friends or family, and that creates larger households. And the secondary attack rate, meaning the percent of people who become infected by an index case in a household, is somewhere around 30%. It's high. Contact in household is about 2.3 times more dangerous than contacts outside of households in general. And larger households have more routes of introduction of the virus into the home, and then once it's inside, more secondary cases in the house. And Philadelphia, as has been mentioned, is a city of stark disparities. And Councilperson Kim mentioned that both COVID-19 and evictions are clustered in the same poor neighborhoods. So we have a city that's kind of like divided in many ways, and that affects the transmission of the virus. Using our best guesses of seroprevalence, around 11% in pregnant women. That's from a study at Penn. And as Dr. Stanford mentioned, cases are rising very quickly right now and projected to rise over the next 4 weeks. Looking at a scenario of a moderate fall epidemic that might infect about 17%, we asked what would have happened if these moratoriums were not enforced and not continue to be enforced. And this is our model simulation from there's 1 million people grouped in households in this simulation, and it starts out without any evictions. And then you can see in orange what might happen if evictions resumed at five times the usual rate with a backlog of 4 months on September 1st. And then blue, what would maybe occur without evictions. This area here is the additional case that might be attributed to evictions or averted by the policy. So if evictions had continued at that rate citywide, we would expect a prevalence around 20% instead of 17%. That's an extra 3% of the population infected. So the moratorium will avert around 47,500 cases under this scenario. There's lots of different scenarios, and that increases with the fold increase in eviction rate. And evictions affect everyone. If you have larger households due to eviction and doubling up, the transmission that occurs in those households spreads throughout the city, and we would have households that were not affected by eviction at all would still have an increased relative risk of infection of about 12% by the end of the year. That's just a relative increase, I should note. So evictions lead to a significant increase in infections. That increase is especially profound when both evictions and contacts, meaning people who are not able to isolate, occur more frequently in poor neighborhoods. And evictions increase cases not just among evicted households, but for all households, as increased transmission spreads throughout the interconnected city. This model was just looking at doubling up. Shelters are very important in the spread of the virus. There's been a number of outbreaks. And when we add shelters to these kinds of models, it gets harder to predict and larger epidemics. And I should note these models aren't meant to predict the course of the epidemic. That's up to what we do individually and as a city. They just focus on the role of eviction under a variety of scenarios. This is the team that worked on the modeling. And this is more details and code is available here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you for your work.
Sure.
Brianna Westbrooks, are you there and connected?
Yes, I am. Can you all hear me, see me, all that?
Yes. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Okay. Good morning, Chairperson Gaudier and members of the City Council Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless. My name is Brianna Westbrooks, and I am the Government Affairs Manager with the Pennsylvania Apartment Association. I am testifying regarding Bills 200414, 420, and 421. These bills would create an eviction moratorium lasting until the end of the year, waive late fees for residents experiencing COVID-19 financial hardships, and expand the time frame for mandated payment plans for residents experiencing COVID-19 financial hardships. We know that there are Philadelphians who are struggling right now during these unprecedented times. Continued collaboration between all stakeholders is the only way we can effectively address the challenges that we are facing. And we also have to acknowledge that 70% of the property owners in Philadelphia own 10 properties or less. So if we are going to emerge from this crisis stronger, we must find policy solutions that ensure that residents and property owners that are also small businesses can thrive. Rental assistance is a policy solution that unites all of us, and we are really appreciative of City Council's support for additional funding for rental assistance. We believe that this is a solution that addresses the long-term ramifications of this pandemic, whereas certain aspects of the proposals in front of you today further complicate a complex web of policies from different levels and branches of government. I will start by saying we appreciate the conversations we have had with members of the Committee about Housing, and we particularly appreciate conversations we have had with Councilmember Gautier's office. I will start by addressing the eviction moratorium legislation, which is Bill 200414. On August 31st, before the expiration of the state eviction moratorium and before the Center of Disease Control issued their version of eviction moratorium, PAA proactively announced that given the specific circumstances that exist in Philadelphia, we would support an eviction moratorium that would apply to residents who have COVID-19 financial hardships. Governor Wolf's statewide moratorium that ended on September 1st specifically applied to non-payment rent, and other breaches of the lease were allowed to proceed. In addition, other bills that are a part of this Emergency Housing Protection Act require that residents have COVID-19 financial hardships. So we are requesting that this bill be amended to remain consistent with those pieces of housing legislation, as well as in the same spirit as Governor Wolf's previous moratorium. With this amendment, we strongly believe that the vast majority of renters would still be immune to eviction proceedings, and property owners would be able to address the residents who are breaching other aspects of leases and who are potentially negatively impacting their neighbors. Bill 200421, which was introduced by Councilmember Gautier, as written, would extend the duration that residents with COVID-19 hardships qualify for mandated payment plans. We had several amendment suggestions that would clarify some of the problems that we had with the original bill language. Specifically, we requested that an amendment be specify that established payment plans cannot be retroactively altered. And we appreciate the conversations we've had with Councilmember Gautier's office and making changes to address our concern. And then lastly, Bill 200420, which was introduced by Councilmember Brooks, as written, would extend late fees for residents with COVID-19 hardships until September 2021. So I want to conclude by saying we do believe that Philadelphia residents facing COVID-19 hardships should have grace periods, but we have concerns about the long-term impacts that these three bills could have on the rental market. Some property owners have gone for as long as 7 months without collecting rent from residents, and the status quo and the way things are going right now is simply not sustainable for these small businesses. So we believe that our suggested amendments, particularly our suggestion for Bill 200414, will help residents who are struggling right now while also balancing the necessity of property owners to safely operate their businesses and maintain financial solvency. We have to keep in mind throughout all these policy discussions that property owners are small business owners, and this legislation is having an adverse impact on them. But if we continue to have these conversations and to collaborate, we strongly believe that we can help Philadelphians emerge from this crisis without putting further strain on small businesses and creating additional long-term issues for our housing market. So thank you for your time. That's the end of my statement.
Thank you for your testimony. Rashida Phillips, are you on and connected?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Rashida Phillips, and I am Managing Attorney of Housing Policy at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. As you've heard from other panelists, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, evictions impacted nearly 1 in 14 renters. Since the pandemic, the number of people facing housing instability and imminent eviction has continued to rise, and as such, the normal resources that we would have to address it are extremely inadequate. There are currently over 2,000 pending lockouts that could occur as soon as November 8th. Those 2,000 pending lockouts are households, so that means that's more than 2,000 people. We're talking, that means that over 2,000, primarily Black and Brown women, their children, seniors, people with disabilities, essential workers, low-wage workers will be unhoused with few options at a time when they'll be less creditworthy for an application, unable to gather a security deposit or access their old deposit. Again, city programs cannot cover the over 2,000 people in households, and many of those programs require that you already be homeless. Reinstating the moratorium is essential at this time as we face a second wave of the pandemic. Again, Pennsylvania's statewide percentages of COVID-19 is at its highest since August, with over 1,100 cases in 2 weeks. Governor Wolf himself said that the fall resurgence is here. We need to act quickly to prevent these numbers from further spiking. Again, as you've heard, the pandemic has hit Black and Brown communities like a sledgehammer, and because systemic and structural racism has a predictable set of results, we can expect the toll of the fall resurgence to fall most heavily on those communities again. I won't belabor the point because others have already spoken to this, but just I think it's worth emphasizing, right, that early data from the Reinvestment Fund shows that areas with elevated eviction rates fall within zip codes with the highest COVID-19 positivity and hospitalization rates, and that zip codes with higher COVID-19 positivity and hospitalization rates have predominantly Black renters. This gives us a very clear picture of who's most at risk without a moratorium in place. Evictions create a public health hazard for every single person who gets evicted and their community, not only people evicted for non-payment of rent or those who are experiencing a COVID-19 hardship. The risks to consider include people going in and out of the courthouse, people having to use public transportation to get to and from court, the number of tenants who will be evicted and become homeless or have to double up in housing situations, removal of possessions and moving, and the risk of exposure during those processes. As has been reported by the Philadelphia Inquirer, the lockout process itself includes inconsistent or no notice at all, putting people in a position to be unable to access masks, medications, other essential items and necessities to help them avoid infection. A large number of pending evictions, the threat of mass reinfection, and the threat of a second wave of the virus as the weather gets colder may signal the need to shut down our economy yet again. Despite the various eviction moratoria, the diversion programs, the rental assistance, other protections and resources that were created for both landlords and tenants, many have still been unable to access them due to lack of notice, confusion, inconsistent enforcement, unclear or short timelines, tenants being unable to access various documents, or landlords simply refusing to accept rental assistance. As you'll hear from Greg Heller, 44% of landlords have not filled out their paperwork, or roughly 7,000 tenants have been unable to access rent relief. This is a mind-boggling number, especially after hearing Brianna Westbrook's testimony about the landlord's need to collect rent. We need a universal moratorium. We need to work together to stabilize renters. There are other options other than the court system. We have a new eviction diversion program that you've heard about that began in September 2020, thanks to the amazing work of City Council and DHCD. As a result, renters and their landlords have better options than they've had before, including faster resolutions for most cases, preventing harmful eviction judgments against tenants that will impact their ability to rent into the far, far future. Increased support for landlords and tenants through tenants being matched with housing counselors who will help facilitate the rental assistance, and clearing the backlog of cases through mediation so that when the court does reopen, it can focus on the cases that are most critical and that need a speedy trial. We also have a $125 million pool of state funding for rental assistance that goes directly to the landlord. The city is matching those funds so that landlords can receive up to $9,000 to help cover back rent. We need to let the diversion and rental assistance support renters and landlords. It's not enough to just enact a moratorium for those who can provide a COVID-related hardship. By doing that, right, we're guaranteeing that more people will have hardships, right, instead of fewer. We want to prevent people from having COVID-related hardships. We already have a patchwork of laws that do that, the CDC declaration and EHPA diversion program. But again, this patchwork is too confusing for landlords and tenants alike. So most tenants are not actually benefiting from those protections at the moment. The only way to ensure that full protection is with a universal moratorium. I'm going to just skip around because I know we're pressed for time, but want to just highlight a few other really important things. Landlords who are specifically concerned about their ability to collect pre-COVID back rent have had the ability to file in landlord court since September 3rd when the courts reopened, and many of them have. 722 cases were filed in September. 495 have been filed so far in October. That's adding another over 1,000 people who are at risk of imminent eviction in the next couple of weeks or months. Landlords will again be able to file complaints that include pre-COVID amounts once the moratorium lifts in January if they have not taken advantage of the other protections. Extending this moratorium or reinstating it gives renters additional time to access rental assistance, diversion, and other supports. And finally, if in fact it's a landlord's concern is collecting rent, let's be honest, the eviction process does not make that happen quicker. It makes the possibility even more remote. As national and local research has documented very well over the years, evictions thrust families into dangerous cycles of poverty, while homelessness ends up costing the city more in shelter costs, medical costs, and other social service costs. So let's be absolutely clear here. This isn't about the ability to just collect rent, right? But it's about the ability for landlords to evict. So let's just be honest about that. When I testified before this committee in June, I noted that COVID is working with a vastly different timeline, one that's unpredictable at best, even knowing that many of us retain hopeful visions that we would be in a far better place come October, but we're not. So this moment calls on us to think differently, do differently, and to prioritize the protection of human life over capital and over rent collection. Compounding the global crisis and its impact on the people who call Philadelphia home does not have to be inevitable. It will be if we don't pass this moratorium. It's within our collective power to prevent a housing and homelessness crisis of epic proportions at a time when we can say without risk of exaggeration that being unhoused could mean a death sentence for some. So I urge you to vote in favor of the 3 EHPA bills before you today in full. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Rashida. Councilmember Gim, did you have a point of clarification?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify a comment that Brianna Westbrook made about whether the governor's eviction moratorium was limited to those who only had COVID-related hardship. Rashida, I think you would know the answer to that, but my understanding is that it was a blanket moratorium for non-payment of rent, regardless of COVID-related hardship. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so there was, and the governor does endorse this bill, the reinstatement of the eviction moratorium, regardless of COVID-related hardship as well. And I just wanted to make that clear because I think Brianna said that the governor's moratorium only applied to COVID-related hardship, and I wanted to make it clear that it did not.
Thank you. Greg Heller, are you on and connected?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Hi, I'm Greg Heller. I'm Senior Vice President of Community Investment at Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. Honorable Chairman, Chairperson, and members of the committee, I'm here to provide testimony on bills 200414, 200420, 200421, and specifically to speak to the city's efforts to assist tenants and landlords during the COVID-19 pandemic. The City of Philadelphia and Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, or PHDC, have several programs to assist renters and landlords. As we develop and operate these programs, we have been in regular contact with representatives from HAPCO and the Pennsylvania Apartment Association, as well as tenant advocacy groups. We recognize that small landlords are critical to ensuring affordable housing for the City of Philadelphia. Nearly 60% of unsubsidized affordable rental units are owned by landlords with 5 or fewer properties in their portfolio. We're administering 2 emergency rental assistance programs right now where payments go directly to landlords. Phase 1 can provide a total of up to $2,500, and Phase 2 can provide a total of up to $9,000. The Phase 1 emergency rental assistance program has paid out over $8.5 million to over 3,600 households, and expect to spend out our $10 million in program funds in the next couple of weeks. Because demand outpaces funds available, we've raised over $80,000 in private donations to supplement our public funds for this program. We are grateful to the generosity of our many donors. The Phase 2 rental assistance program, which is part of the statewide PA CARES program, has received over 6,000 applications requesting over $23.6 million in funds. We're processing these applications and getting payments out as quickly as we can. The city has committed its local share of federal funds to matching the funding from the state's program so that we can provide more funds to landlords and tenants. Our landlord working capital program, administered in partnership with Impact Loan Fund, provides low-interest loans to landlords citywide who own 15 or fewer rental units and who are experiencing cash flow challenges due to the pandemic. The Rental Improvement Fund, another program, provides loans to landlords who need help repairing their properties. This program provides loans under $25,000 to make repairs, cure code violations, and address lead paint issues. This program is also administered by Impact Loan Fund. Our Shallow Rent program provides rental assistance for tenants living in subsidized affordable housing. Programs like the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit result in rents being capped, but at levels that are frequently still unaffordable for many Philadelphians. Currently, we are providing $1.6 million to support 394 tenants. These programs are significant and would not have been possible without state and federal funds. It's important to remember that the struggle of low-income tenants and small landlords are not new to the pandemic. We hope that after the impacts of the pandemic lessen, that we continue to provide programs to support tenants and landlords on a long-term basis. These efforts are crucial to the stability of our housing and the well-being of our city. Chairperson and members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you so much, Greg. And the last person for this panel, Matt Shoemaker, are you on and connected?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Good morning, Council. My name is Matt Shoemaker, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm a homeowner and landlord in Philadelphia, and I support extending the EHPA and the protections it provides. I'm sure I'm not alone in the thought that 2020 has been one of the most stressful years in recent memory, and that's coming from someone who hasn't had their entire life turned upside down because of the ongoing COVID pandemic. Just from a place of concern for my fellow neighbors, I can't imagine the overwhelming stress of being laid off from my job or having hours cut, already drastically changing my lifestyle. To add on top of that, the despair of not knowing whether you'll have a place to sleep in a week or two is cruel and antithesis of brotherly love, in my opinion. Adding more misery to our communities is the exact opposite of what I'd expect society to do in a time of unprecedented struggle not seen since the Great Depression. As of now, there's an estimated 112,000 Philadelphians that have lost their job as a direct result of COVID, and 2,100 Philadelphians are at risk of being evicted, and I believe the city should use all resources they can to prevent this from happening. Putting aside the humanity aspect of looking at it from the position of being a landlord, I also support these extensions because they are coupled with programs that will provide relief for impacted landlords. Included in these programs is an eviction diversion, which creates mediation programs that help tenants take advantage of all government resources available to them, creating repayment plans to pay back rent in a timely manner, and PHL rent assistance, which can help pay back landlords directly for missed rent. These measures provide much needed relief to landlords and tenants impacted by COVID, which is exactly what needs to happen during a global pandemic. Additionally, landlords will save money in the long run by not having to take their tenants to court, potentially throwing away money on legal fees and any drawn-out litigation. COVID is obviously still very much a reality, and many experts say a second wave is looming, and having a property sitting there empty when it could be occupied with a repayment plan helps no one. I ask that our city government act boldly and with the seriousness that this terrible situation deserves and extend the protections provided by the EHPA. Thank you, and that's all I have.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments for members from members of the committee for this panel?
I just had a clarifying question, Madam Chair. Oops, I'll let Councilmember Quinones-Sanchez go. Sorry.
Councilmember Quinones-Sanchez.
You can let Councilmember Agim go. It might be the same one, so.
For Greg, could you, I think Rashida Phillips talked about this a little bit, but could you share how many applications did you receive from tenants versus how many applications were fulfilled by their landlords, requests for aid?
Sure. So let's see. As As of yesterday, we had gotten a total of 12,150 applications from tenants. And 7,044 where the landlord had responded.
Okay, of the same, and that's for what time period?
That's since the program opened in early July.
Okay, thank you. And so has some of that been an increase? Have you seen an improvement over that? Because I think you gave us different numbers earlier. And have you seen a change in that because of the changes in the program?
We have seen an increase. We don't know specifically what we can attribute it to. As I mentioned, the city agreed to match the state funds, which allowed us to increase the amount of assistance that could be provided from $750 a month to $1,500 a month. We do think that was significant, and based on surveys that we've done of landlords, we know that $750 a month, many landlords felt that it was too low. And so we think that increasing the amount of assistance probably had an impact on getting more landlords to participate. But our staff have also been very proactive over the last few weeks in trying to reach out to landlords and make sure that they know that their tenant applied and try and urge them to respond. So I think it's probably a combination of the city committing the matching funds and our increased outreach to landlords. That said, the landlord participation rate is still only about 58%. So that still means that 40% of tenants who applied are left out in the cold because their landlord has not responded and or is not willing to participate.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification, and especially thank you for emphasizing that it does make a difference for us to be doing some of this education, and that sometimes people will respond a little bit better, but we have a long way to go. Rashida, a quick question is, we're trying to understand these thousands of households who, existed, whose hardships existed pre-COVID. You've done so much work in this area, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what it means if we were to narrow the coverage of this eviction moratorium only to those who to those who demonstrate COVID-related hardship, because I think when we discussed this before, we've seen difficulties both at the courts with landlords and with others responding or being able to help even when we add on restrictions. And so, if you could just speak a little bit to that and what you think of the, the narrowing of the eviction moratorium to only those who have experienced a COVID hardship.
Absolutely. I think what we're doing when we limit it is that we're setting up two classes of renters. We're setting up people who we think deserve protection under the moratorium and deserve that extended protection from being exposed to COVID. We're separating from those who we think don't, simply because they may have fallen behind on hard times prior to March 1st, 2020, which feels really arbitrary, I think. And I, again, think it sets up two classes of people. When we're talking about what those over 2,000 households of people at risk of eviction look like, there's nuance there. These are not people who have just fallen behind on rent. These are people who may have had repair issues, may have withheld rent, some of the things that Rulandau talked about in terms of the same issues that were still happening before COVID are still happening now. So people unable to get repairs made, people being pushed out for various reasons. Right. And so also, while the courts were closed, many of these cases were able to get into the courts. The courts were still accepting filings, and landlords could get around, some of the restrictions by saying, for example, with the CDC moratorium, saying, tenants have breached their lease agreement by not paying rent, right? So that allows them to get into the courts under a breach instead of under the non-payment, right? So we have to think about the nuance of these over 2,000 households. And it's not just people who fell behind on rent pre-COVID, like some of these cases include during the COVID emergency period as well. And again, I think we really do not want to set up two classes of renters, one who's deserving of a protection and others who are not.
Thank you.
Councilmember Quinones Sanchez, do you have a question still?
Yes, okay. For Greg. I also want to just acknowledge all of the work of the planning division around setting up this program with the housing counseling and all of the different components, and really appreciate the millions of dollars in staff and effort around this stuff. Can you speak to me a little bit about who is being denied and why, and what we could be doing differently and then we'll get to the landlord response piece, but who are we denying and why?
So the criteria for phase 1 and phase 2 are a little different, because phase 1 we designed and it was subject to HUD rules because we were using CDBG funds, and phase 2 the state came up with the rules. So there were slightly different reasons for denials in phase 1 and phase 2. One big one in phase 1 was the income restrictions. In phase 1, we set the income level at 50% of area median income, and in phase 2, the state set it at 100%. So some people who were denied in phase 1 because they were over income were successfully able to apply in phase 2. In both programs, you had to have had a loss of income due to the pandemic. And so some people are denied because they didn't have a job at all, no income in the beginning of the year in January and February, and therefore did not experience an income loss.
Greg, real quickly, when we face these, do we have an internal mechanism to refer these over to OES for the traditional rental assistance program, or we're just letting these people fall through the cracks?
No, I mean, we're definitely coordinating with other departments and referring people when we feel that they're eligible. We're also working closely with our network of housing counselors and with the legal aid agencies. So we are trying very hard to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks.
Okay. As it relates to the landlord and the lack of response when their tenants are applying, what are some of the reasons that you're seeing? Are we having issues with rental license, any of the compliance issues that we should be aware of?
Yeah, definitely. In phase 1, so in phase 2, the state does not have any requirements that the landlord has to have a rental license, has to be free of code violations. They do make the landlord check off a question verifying that they are current on all taxes, although there's not any requirement to actually check on that. So the state program is much more lenient. In phase 1, the one that we were really making sure of is that the landlords did not have open, dangerous L&I violations. There are a handful of landlords who are not receiving assistance because they have open and dangerous L&I violations that they've not been able to cure or that we're not pursuing to cure. But in phase 2, you had much less of that because the state didn't have the same requirements.
So were we able to transfer applications from one to the other, from phase 1 to phase 2, where people did have to reapply?
Yeah, we asked the state that, and they would not allow us to just transfer people over. They required them to fill out this application that the state created and requires everyone to fill out for phase 2. So it's unfortunate, but we have had to tell everyone they have to reapply because of the state's rules for phase 2. But many people have.
And then lastly, we're advocating very strongly, we're working around payment plans with the revenue department. We're going to have to create a different version of this, and we got hope in the next few weeks with this election turns. What, if anything, from a landlord perspective? I think the state program allows landlords to apply directly, but our phase 1 did not, right? Am I correct on that?
Well, no, I mean, both programs were the same way, where the tenant initiates, and then the landlord has to fill out a portion of information. So they're both similar in that regard. We tried to make phase 2 a little simpler. This wasn't a state requirement, but Philadelphia and Allegheny County are the only 2 counties in the state that accept electronic applications for the state's program. And that was just our choice. So we did try to make our electronic system easier for landlords for phase 2. by making some adjustments based on lessons that we learned from phase one. But again, that's only available in Philadelphia, and the rest of the state, they have to fill out a hard copy.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Mr. Weiss, please call the next panel. And before we move on, I'm going to be much less generous with time. So I'm going to ask that people please stick to 3 minutes. I'll have to ask you to wrap up your testimony if you don't. Thank you.
Next panel is Laura Sharp, James Wright, Aaron Kreider, Sonia Nelson, and Marcella Joe.
Laura, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Laura Sharp. I am a proud Philadelphian. I live in District 8, zip code 19119. Hello, Council Member Cindy Bass. And I will begin. In late February, my friends in Manhattan suddenly began dying. And in early March, the whole world suddenly abruptly stopped. As we all know, the initial 2-week shutdown and stay-at-home order lasted for several months. My husband is the owner of a successful design business, and I work in theater and entertainment events. Obviously, neither industry was deemed essential. For several weeks, I spent my time attending Zoom funerals and struggling alongside of my husband to try to comprehend the labyrinth of the just freezing, crashing, baffling, ever-changing unemployment site. I had never applied for unemployment before, and neither had my husband. And I attended Smith College on a full academic scholarship, and I graduated with honors. And the complicated online application process was extremely challenging to me because it was broken. The unemployment system was simply not prepared for the catastrophic impact that the pandemic created. Even after we were approved for a pandemic unemployment, the funds for both myself and my husband unexpectedly took well over 3 months to arrive. During those many months while waiting for the financial assistance, we first bled through our savings and then through our credit cards until we were officially destitute. Inevitably, we fell behind on our substantial rent payments for the first time in our lives. All of a sudden, the world collapsed, and we had the additional fear of possibly no longer having a roof over our heads. And we're not alone. Many of my friends all over the city were and still are in that same situation. And we are all solidly middle class with college degrees and formerly reliable incomes. I'm not sure why there seems to be an assumption that all landlords will inherently do the right thing by their tenants, but I can assure you that that is a false assumption. Regardless of the fact that we had always been model tenants, we have paid our rent on time, kept the property clean, and we have often done our own repairs. We were immediately told that we needed to pay up or move out. We were repeatedly told that our problems, unemployment caused by a global pandemic shutting down most of the world, and a failure on the part of the government to disseminate the approved emergency funds, our problems, were not.
Please do wrap up your testimony. In the next, take the next 20 seconds or so.
Thank you. We're not the landlord's problems. To quote the landlord directly, this is business, so pay up in full or get evicted and have your credit destroyed. Along with thousands of other people in Philadelphia, many of us middle-class, formally engaged members of society and all registered voters, we found ourselves potentially homeless. And the only thing that saved me, the only thing that gave me the time to collect my pandemic unemployment was the eviction moratorium. That's it. That's all we had. The system is still broken. Once again, we're not getting our payments through, I'm not getting my payments through unemployment. And once again, the landlord is telling us he's going to evict us. It's an unprecedented time, and we need the elected leaders of our city to take unprecedented action. And I'm here today to ask you to extend the eviction moratorium, because if not, your inaction will lead to homelessness and actual deaths eventually. I'm here today to ask you to please be the leaders that we've elected you to be. I'm asking you to remember that we live in a community and a society, not just in an economy. I'm here today to strongly encourage you to pass the amendments to the Emergency Housing Act. Thank you very much. And if anyone is hiring, I'm available.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to hear about your struggles at this time. Okay. James Wright, are you there and connected?
Yes, I am, Councilperson.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is James Wright. I am the Director of Community Development at the People's Emergency Center. We are here today to offer commentary on the concerns and challenges that renters face, both small businesses and residential renters. PEC is a community development corporation, social services, comprehensive social services agency that has been in existence since 1972. We have over 235 units of affordable housing in West Philly. That housing is both the emergency housing, transitional housing, and some permanent supportive housing in West Philadelphia. And we also work with business owners along the Lancaster Avenue Business Corridor. I just wanted to underscore some of the previous comments that this is a crisis that has existed prior to the coronavirus. We already know that we were facing significant challenges in terms of evictions and renters and how they can survive in the changing economy. And I know that Eva underlined some programs that were lined up and that we're trying to put in place. But there's still a lot of work to do. And so I appreciate City Council addressing these matters so pointedly, and I hope that you continue to take this issue as a major concern going forward. Prior to coronavirus hitting in the pandemic, there was already counted 5,700 homeless Pennsylvanians, and most of them living, about 1,000 of them living on the street. Not Pennsylvanians, Philadelphians. And then also prior to the coronavirus hitting, COVID-19, the city was not able to support through their prevention program provided by OHS, Office of Homeless Support, Office of Homeless Services, not able to support 72% of the people that applied. That means that something like 7,000 people applied, but were turned away, even though they went and they said they were in imminent danger of becoming homeless. 1,100 people receive assistance, and that's suggesting that nearly 3,000 people or so that were turned away and possibly ended up in shelters or in their cars or doubling up. The other thing that is the statistic I wanted to pull out was in 2019, the school district noted that there was 7,112 students that were children and youth that were homeless. And we know that the city's shelter program only supports 2,700 or so people.
Take the next 20 seconds or so to wrap up.
So the issues are prior to the pandemic, and they are much deeper than the pandemic. And there are issues with unlicensed landlords and licensed landlords that are evicting people and chasing the money ball, as Rashida pointed out. And we just wanted to underscore the fact that the need for an eviction moratorium going forward and other programs to support renters is very significant.
Thank you so much, James, for testifying, and thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Aaron Creeder, are you on and connected? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Jones. Question?
Yes, the People's Emergency Center, you mentioned how many units you have?
Yes, I did. We have 235.
And they are controlled by you?
Yes, we own them and we lease them to low-income families.
Do you refer people beyond your own inventory to other units?
We do. We have relationships with landlords within our service area, and if we cannot help people obtain housing, we refer them out. We also are part of the city's program that began in the fall with providing resources to renters / landlords to prevent evictions.
And generally, have the landlords been cooperative and patient during the pandemic?
To be honest, it's about a 50-50 split. We had one landlord that we kind of had to drag to the table. Some other landlords have been a little bit more cooperative.
Primarily, those units that you control are in the 3rd Councilmatic?
All of the units are in the 3rd Councilmatic District, north of Market Street.
So something you should consider expanding to the 4th in the future.
As we are able, we will expand as we are able.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
PEC is a wonderful organization. I can see why you'd want them in the 4th.
Thank you.
Aaron Creeder, are you there and connected?
Councilmember Aaron wasn't able to join, so we should move on to the next witness.
Okay. Sonia Nelson, are you there and connected?
Yes, I'm here.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sonia Nelson. I am a full-time city worker. I have had a hard time receiving a new place of rent. My ex-landlord, she was renting without a license. She threatened to do a legal lockout for me and my 3 daughters. Because of my credit is fair, I got turned away from so many places. They didn't care that I have a great job or that I have good income. I went to the homeless shelter because I thought she could do the legal lockout, but thank God for the eviction ban moratorium because it protected me and my babies from basically living out on the street. But it was hard. It was extremely hard. And I feel like this moratorium will prevent other people from COVID and from other hardships of being turned down by being evicted. And that's all that I have to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story, and I'm so sorry to hear about what you're going through. Is Marcella, are you on and connected?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hi. Can you state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Yes, sure. My name is Marcella Joe, and I am an employee of Tenant Union Representative Network. And I just want to thank everybody today for their testimony, and it was very enlightening. And thanks for the opportunity. First off, I'd like to say that TURN is in collaborations with the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Program, meaning that we are primarily responsible for the majority of the calls that come through a particular hotline to help tenants out who are having issues with their landlord, rental, whatever the case may be. I have 26 years of experience doing this, and I've talked to tons and tons and thousands of tenants throughout the year. This particular year with this pandemic in place, it's been very devastating for a lot of callers because they're affected by the COVID-19, meaning that these people have very limited income, have lost household income, have sickness within their home, and are unable to pay rent due to limited unemployment or still waiting on unemployment to come through. They're receiving eviction notices. We're seeing more and more eviction notices within the last 2 months. I'm seeing cases where they are now filing for eviction. There are cases in court right now, pending in January and February, November, and December. These people have no idea where they're going to go, how they're going to pay it. They're using the declaration and all the forms that they're supposed to use, but for some reason they're still getting in the courtroom, excuse me. What I'm hearing over the phones, and this is every day, and we're doing about 60, close to 60, 65 calls a day, and the numbers are going up. People are panicking about where am I going? I have no place to go. I have no family support. I have no friend support. I have a house full of children. I don't know where we're going to go. The shelters are not accepting people right now. And they think they're going to be on the streets. So I am pleading to City Council to please support the extension of the moratorium because people don't have money to go anywhere. They don't have any money to pay late fees. Landlords have the audacity to be asking for rent increases, knowing that these people have economic hardship. There's medical hardship, financial hardship, personal hardship, whatever hardship you could name, they're experiencing it. Landlords are going to the extent where they're evicting people without having court orders, illegally putting people out of the property. I get at least 3 calls a day where tenants have been locked out of the property or utilities have been turned off, where landlords are trying to force them out of the unit.
Can I ask that you take the next 30 seconds? Thank you.
Excuse me?
Can I ask that you take the next 30 seconds to wrap up?
Okay, sure. So I'm just going, I'm just asking for the support of City Council to understand that this COVID-19 is affecting everyone of all colors, all income brackets, all tenants in the city of Philadelphia and Philadelphia citizens. And just before I close up, I just got a text message from a family member that 5 people, a family of 5 of our church members, have been stricken with the virus. Just got that information today. So again, it is real, it is alive, and it's spreading.
I'm so sorry to hear that about your loved ones. And I thank you for your testimony and for your work as well.
You're welcome.
Mr. Weiss, will you please call the next panel or witness to testify?
Jacob Spidell, Cynthia Bradford, Paul Cohen, Mylan Marvelous, Mehmet Eren.
Jacob, are you there and connected?
Hello, yes, this is Jacob Spidell.
Wonderful. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Jacob Spidell, and I'm the Director of Tenant Rights at Senior Law Center. Thank you, council members, for the opportunity to speak. At Senior Law Center, we seek justice for older adults. We're the only nonprofit organization in Pennsylvania whose mission is dedicated solely to providing legal services for older persons, and one of the few in the nation. In our work, we assist seniors facing eviction and other threats to safe shelter. During this pandemic, we have been especially concerned about our clients and their unique susceptibility to the virus. As an example of what seniors in Philadelphia are facing, I'd like to tell you about Beverly Cobb. Beverly Cobb is 81 years old and a longtime Philadelphia resident. She lives on her own, has a number of disabilities, some of which require her to use oxygen. Of course, this means if she catches COVID-19, her outlook is especially risky. She had hoped to testify and tell her own story, but she wasn't feeling well enough to talk to you. She asked me to tell you her story. I believe she's watching now on TV. Thank you, Ms. Cobb, for letting me tell your story. Ms. Cobb's landlord filed an eviction against her based on termination of term. Ms. Cobb pays her rent every month. She's on a fixed income. She owes nothing to her landlord. She has not lost income because of COVID-19, but her landlord is trying to evict her for good cause termination of term. I'm going to quote from the notice that the landlord sent to her and filed with the court, and I'm quoting, "Beverly has to leave due to construction I have going on the premises. The construction workers will not enter the apartment due to Beverly's health issues, and she's on oxygen. Since she's on oxygen, they cannot turn off the electricity. In order to fully work on the apartment, it needs to be vacant." Ms. Cobb's landlord is able to move forward with this eviction only because she is paying her rent and she can afford to pay it. If she had lost income and couldn't pay rent, the federal eviction moratorium from the Centers for Disease Control would prohibit her landlord from moving forward with an eviction until after December 31st. She could provide the declaration that she couldn't pay because of COVID-19. Unfortunately, the federal moratorium has a gap. Philadelphia courts have interpreted it as not stopping evictions for termination of term. This means that seniors who have a fixed income and cannot safely leave their homes can be evicted because they're not protected by a moratorium based on losing income because of COVID. This landlord's renovations can wait. The eviction can wait. During a public health emergency like this one, where cases are on the rise, where evicted tenants would have to double or triple up or go into crowded shelters, it is important to protect tenants like Ms. Cobb whose landlords are trying to evict based on termination of term. During COVID, many tenants with year leases have had their leases end and have seen their landlords simply refuse to renew their leases.
Can I ask that you take the next 30 seconds to wrap up?
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
Or we have seen landlords refuse to renew leases when tenants do not agree to large rent increases. These tenants are subject to eviction for termination of term. They are unable to move to other landlords because of COVID, but they're not protected by a moratorium that only protects tenants who've lost income because of COVID. The existing eviction moratorium bill does explicitly allow evictions to cease or prevent an imminent threat of harm by the person being evicted, including physical harm or harassment. So a landlord who has a threatening or harassing tenant can evict that tenant. The gap here is for the tenant who is being evicted based on termination of term. Just this morning, while waiting to testify, I received a call from an elderly veteran who had received notice that his landlord is not renewing his lease, and plans to evict for termination of term, even though he is current and paying his rent. He would not be protected by an eviction moratorium limited to people affected by COVID. For the health and safety of the public, tenants should not be evicted until the pandemic has receded. I urge you to extend the protections for all tenants. And again, Ms. Cobb, if you're watching, thank you for letting me share your story.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Ms. Cobb as well. Cynthia Bradford, are you there and connected?
Yes, I am here. Good afternoon.
Oh, wonderful. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Bradford. I am here today in representation of myself and others in the world. Today I'm going to start by saying I signed my lease in July 2019, the 1st. My landlord promised that full repairs in my apartment, yet still until today I moved in, there was still no repairing done. There was a satisfaction in the home that I wanted to be modified. There was no assistance done. My home allowed full use of, it was not even to my satisfaction. The landlord considered to do the repairs. I asked him multiple times. He considered it as a luxury. Now, facing this time, it's been a hardship for me and others as well in the world. And it's not knowing that there will be even more upcoming issues. I have chose to remain in my home. When I first walked in the doors, I was told the apartment will be completed. And while still residing in the home, yet and still 2 months after I lived here, there was still no assistance and my rent was still paid. On this time, as right now, Mr. Prince Israel was my personal assistant representation of the apartment landlord has undergone a lot of issues. And I had other issues from tenants living other than me on the first floor. I have suffered from bed bugs, termites, mice, mold, ceilings cracked, leaking, and busted pipes in the basement. I've asked my landlord several times to come and do repairs. He still has not attended, or more or less, I had to call L&I for assistance. My home has issues, several violation codes, and I asked for assistance repeatedly over and over again. It's been 2 times me and my daughter came into the home. She came into home one day, and 2x4 had hit my daughter in the head with a piece of plywood. I had asked the landlord to also assist with this matter. Now I'm writing this letter or speaking to someone for assistance. The winter is now approaching. It's the second time while living in this home. The property was still not attended to. My daughter and I need a warm water to assist us to survive. Since the landlord has already not assisted us during the time of July up until now, it is unfortunately unfeasible for us to live in. I am asking that someone assists us for assistance during the pandemic of the COVID-19. And we are also being jeopardized from this tragedy that's going on around the world today. When I asked him to resolve the matters, he did not assist us. He was a bunch of negligence going on in the routine of all of the furniture that I had brought into my home with me. It's been demolished, infested, and we also need assistance to keep a roof over our heads. Now, with that being said, we are also going through a trial right now of our life that we have to face the COVID, and we are very scared of being forced out of our homes. We are citizens doing our part and ensure the good public health of wearing a mask and the community is social distancing at our homes. But we do not, but to do that, the city has a part of a lot of, excuse me, I'm very a little nervous right now, I apologize.
I will that,
homes.
Take the next 30 seconds.
Yes.
Okay.
That is why we're here today. I urge you, the City Council, to extend the Home Emergency Housing Protection Act and the bill, which will allow them to stay in our homes, 1,000 more of the family members in the Philadelphians to remain in their homes as well. I ask that you please do so and vote today, because this is an urgent matter.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story, and I'm really sorry to hear what you've been experiencing. Let's see. Paul Cohen, are you there and connected?
I am.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Paul Cohen. I am General Counsel to HAPCO Philadelphia. HAPCO Philadelphia is the city's largest membership organization for low to moderate income private rental housing. HAPCO Philadelphia's membership owns primarily single family and duplex rentals in the streets and neighborhoods of Philadelphia. HAPCO basically has a membership of people that are basically what you call your mom and pop owners. These aren't rich landlords. These are people just struggling to survive that maybe own 1 or 2 rental units, and they are being devastated by what is happening. There's an ecosystem that exists between landlords and tenants. It's like any other ecosystem. And when you start messing with an ecosystem, you have to be very careful. It's okay to tweak an ecosystem, but when you start messing with it in a large way, it creates many unintended consequences. I did submit written testimony. I know I don't have a lot of time this morning, so what I'd like to do is just incorporate that testimony into the record. So I just address a couple of different points.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So what we have is a situation of evictions, which people don't realize that landlords don't want to evict tenants. It's the last thing in the world that a landlord wants to do. A landlord wants to keep their tenant. They want good tenants that pay the rent. As a last resort, when you have a tenant that's not paying the rent and not doing what they're supposed to do, that's when a landlord seeks an eviction. We're all on the same page with regard to evictions. We want to eliminate evictions. We don't want them to happen. Unfortunately, things and circumstances present themselves where they do have to happen. The solution, however, does exist. The solution is rental assistance. But you have to make a rental assistance program that works for both the landlords and the tenants. And I think we can all agree, both landlords and tenants, that's the way to go. Everyone is in favor of rental assistance. However, we need to fix the rental assistance program as it currently exists. A couple things real quick that I think we could do to tweak it to make it work for both landlords and tenants. Number one, we need to simplify the application process. It's just way too complicated. Number two, we need to eliminate the compliance issues. So yes, I understand landlords need to get into compliance, very important. But think about it, if they don't have the money, how are they going to get into compliance? Some landlords haven't gotten paid for 10, 11, 12 months now. This moratorium is going to continue. They're not going to get paid for 1.5 years to 2 years. There's no way they're going to be able to get the money to be able to comply. Get them the rental assistance and require that the rental assistance be used toward compliance. That's one of the things that we can do. It's kind of like a chicken and egg problem.
30 seconds.
Sure. So if we could figure out how to do that, that would be extremely helpful. The other thing we could do is with regard to the application process, if we could get the landlords to be able to apply for the rental assistance rather than the tenants. The landlords are in a better position to know that they don't have the rental money and are in a better position to apply for it so that they can get the needed funds and then make sure that there's a way, obviously, that the tenant gets credit for it. Just one last thing, I know that I'm out of time, but I did want to address Councilwoman Gim's comments with regard to the CDC. And I can just clarify that with regard to whether or not you have to have a hardship that's related to COVID-19. In the moratorium, it specifically states that the individual has to certify that they're unable to pay the full rent or make a full housing payment due to a substantial loss of household income, loss of compensable hours of work or wages, a layoff, or extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. So it doesn't specifically say a COVID-19 related hardship, but all of those things basically relate to a COVID-19 related hardship. Thank you for letting me testify. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you so much. I think everybody here agrees with you about the importance of rental assistance. And I also know, from multiple conversations that we have that the administration wants to hear from landlords on how this program can work better. And so those are conversations that we should continue to have even after today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's the next person next? Sorry.
Miley Marvelous.
Yes, hello, thank you.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure, my name is Miley Marvelous. Thank you for the opportunity to share my views. I've lived in Philly for about 22 years now. I've been a small landlord for about 12 years. I did actually benefit from some of the housing assistance that you guys have been talking about. I'm in support of these bills. I want to tell you a little bit about what it means to be a small landlord in Philly for me. I've renovated about 10 houses so far. Once a house is renovated and leased out, I don't really make much money on it because of loans I have to repay. But every little bit helps. Every home that I've bought has previously been abandoned and empty. I take great pride in having been able to bring them back to life, create homes for people. I'm proud to generate tax revenue for the city, for the water department, and everything else that comes with a home being part of a neighborhood. I've never gotten a 10-year tax abatement for investing in my community. I'm a small landlord. I need the money that I make on my properties, but it's not just about the money for me. Since I own property in the neighborhood I live in, I don't just care about rents. I also care about my neighborhood, and I care about my tenants. Throughout COVID, we've constantly heard people say, we're all in this together. And this should be true. I believe this to be true. And I believe it shouldn't mean that landlords get all of the rent all the time, and that tenants who have lost their jobs due to a pandemic have nowhere to live. It doesn't feel like we're all in together. There's got to be give and take, and we all have to bear some of the burden. My tenants, the way I am, my tenants are my neighbors, and I've worked with each tenant that has had a problem with paying. I've got mortgage to pay, and I want my rent money. Believe me, I want my rent money, but it's not right for the city to only insulate the wealthy and fortunate, such as myself, and allow the poor or unfortunate to suffer, because I don't want to see my neighbors put out of their houses. I'm also, as a longtime resident, I'm afraid of investors that have deep pockets that come into West Philly. People aren't from the neighborhood or aren't even from Philly, but that people, that they don't care about the city, that they just see Philly as an opportunity to make money for themselves. I hate when I see developers tear down historic buildings like we see here in West Philly for a profit. I hate when they build ugly new boxes for profit. And I hate that it seems like they're trying to use my reputation as a small landlord who cares about people to make it easier for them to be able to evict people for profit. I support these bills because it makes it harder for those kinds of companies to call the shots. And as a small landlord, I really don't want my name being used to say that small landlords oppose this kind of thing. Evictions aren't just inhumane to the tenants, but I feel like my neighborhood and the city also loses out, that we throw away human people, we throw away skills and knowledge, and we break up the fabric of our communities. I don't benefit from having a mass turnover of neighbors and evictions all over. I don't benefit from losing neighbors that have been part of the city and know how the city works and who make Philly, Philly. And in the long run, I really want to see this bill extend the eviction moratorium, despite any financial challenges. As a small landlord who treats his tenants like neighbors.
The next 20 seconds or so to wrap
20
up.
seconds.
Yes.
Yeah. As a small landlord, treating my tenants like neighbors, I've never had to evict someone, as far as I know, as far as I remember in the past 12 years. I've had disputes and arguments, but I've always worked it out together with my tenants. And we're all in this together. That means we need to get through it together. I want my 4 daughters to live in a city that makes itself stronger by supporting the vulnerable among us. And I feel like that's what this bill is doing. It's supporting people that really need support. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you for your compassion and commitment to our neighborhoods. I hope that I'm saying this correctly, Nimet on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Yes, Nimet Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed. Thank you.
Great. My name is Nimet Aaron, and I am the principal of Kensington Health Sciences Academy, a neighborhood public high school. I stand before City Council today asking that Bills 200, 414, 420, and 421 be passed. As a neighborhood high school principal, I have seen too many high school children experience homelessness, and I've seen how homelessness negatively impacts their education. Because of the collective irresponsibility of adults this year, the United States was not able to contain COVID-19. Because of the collective irresponsibility of adults, children lost 3 months of learning last spring. Now, this fall, because of the sustained collective irresponsibility of adults, my students have to begin their school year online. The last 7 weeks have been the hardest 7 weeks of teaching and learning that I have experienced in my 13 years as an educator. My school team and our KHSA families have worked relentlessly to make online school work. Teachers have spent hours on the phone teaching children how to log in. Support staff have spent hours in the car delivering hotspots. And students and teachers have spent hours in their homes trying to feel the same excitement about school from their kitchens and bedrooms. Because that is what has happened. Because of the pandemic, school is now home and home is now school. So if you take away a child's home, you take away their school as well. Again, if you take away a child's home, you take away their school as well. KHSA, like many neighborhood schools, has a high population of students that are susceptible to homelessness. If these bills are not passed, you will be taking away not only my students' place of shelter, but their place of learning as well. How can a child successfully participate in online school if they are evicted from their home? Because COVID-19, homeless students could depend before COVID-19, homeless students could depend on their school building as a place of stability, a place for food, a place for warmth. Now, as we enter the cold autumn months, if you evict a child from their home, you are essentially evicting them from their school. In the past, I have spent hours on the phone trying to find shelter for KHSA students who have suddenly lost their housing. Often, even if a student is lucky to get into a shelter one night, there is no promise that the shelter is available the next night, as most shelters in Philadelphia provide housing on a single night basis. Exactly where will homeless students complete online school during the day if they are evicted?
Can I ask that you take the next 30 seconds or so?
Yes.
Testimony.
Children need stability at this time. Children need shelter. Children need regularity. Children need to know, even though the world is upside down right now, at least they can connect with their loving teachers daily from the safety of their own home. Please support our youth education and not block it. I stand before City Council today asking that bills 200, 414, 420, and 421 be passed. Do not evict students from their home. Do not evict students from their schools.
Thank you so much for your support. For your testimony and for your support of our students. Mr. Weiss, will you call up the next witness to testify?
Yeah, so now's time for the public testimony portion of the hearing. Modesto, are you able to call those folks into the hearing now?
Yes, we can. We can get them in one by one, or if you'd like, we could take a small break and get them all in.
Yeah, let's take a short break and we'll get those folks lined up to speak.
Hi, this is Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Good. We're just to let you know, we're in a group call. We're calling several participants that are scheduled for the hearing today.
Hi.
So it's going to take a few minutes
Hello.
to do so. Once we get everyone in, then we'll proceed. Thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Weiss, will you please call the next witness to testify?
Yes. Teresa Brabson?
Yes, thank you. My name is Teresa Brabson, and I'm the legal director at the Legal Clinic for the Disabled, where we serve clients who are low-income individuals living with mental and physical disabilities, as well as the deaf and hard of hearing. Thank you for this opportunity to testify in favor of bills 200, 414, 420, and 421. This pandemic has impacted every member of our community, but we must recognize that it has hit our most vulnerable communities the hardest. All of us have tried to adapt to a new normal over the past few months, but for many low-income renters with disabilities, this normal means an ever-present threat of illness, eviction, homelessness, and cascading debt. At the Legal Clinic for the Disabled, we see every day how the Emergency Housing Protection Act is working to mitigate potentially devastating impacts on our fellow Philadelphians. An eviction moratorium, working in tandem with the diversion program and rental assistance, affords tenants and landlords critical time to work out tenable solutions to ensure that landlords receive their rent and tenants avoid homelessness. This package of bills is critical to fill gaps in existing federal protections. The CDC moratorium falls short of protecting all of our community members, and its implementation has been marred by uncertainty and confusion. I urge this council to extend the citywide eviction moratorium to protect all Philadelphians. Please consider and remember our community members who fall through the cracks far too often. Tenants with disabilities such as autoimmune disorders, mobility issues, cognitive issues, or developmental delays, just to name a few, who need us to pass a broadly applicable eviction moratorium. Eviction is disruptive to anyone. Right now, it can be fatal for an individual with a disability. Protections become meaningless if the people who need them the most can't access or understand them. As a city, we must do what we can to reduce burdens on our struggling peers, not increase them. These three bills, taken together, embody Philadelphia's commitment to continue to rebuilding in a thoughtful and compassionate way. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Mr. Weiss, will you please call the next witness to testify?
Michelle Scheidel?
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Hello.
Hi, Michelle, are you there?
Hi, yes, my name is Michelle Scheidel. How are you?
I am well. Can you proceed with your testimony?
Yes, ma'am. I'm a resident of Philadelphia, and I'm also a landlord in Philadelphia, and I am in favor of extending the emergency housing protections at this time. I think that in the last 10 years, especially, Philadelphians have voted consistently and with a lot of enthusiasm for a representative government which has the citizenry's most basic needs as priorities. Half of Philadelphians rent their homes, and it isn't only indecent to not have protections in place with regard to the most basic need of shelter, but it's also, even though there wasn't any way to prevent or predict this crisis, it's not what anyone expects from our current local government here in Philadelphia. So I am in favor of extending eviction moratorium, the mediations, for sure waiving late fees at this time. One thing that I would like to see maybe after the election stopped using all the oxygen is a more robust outreach campaign about the rental assistance program. I was surprised to just learn that private citizens can donate to it. And food banks have had an incredibly increased demand lately, but also have been surprised by the uptick in donations. There isn't any reason to think that a bank to help people with their shelter needs wouldn't elicit the same response. A lot of people are hurting right now, but there are also a lot of people who are doing quite well and would help and are looking for ways to pitch in if only they knew how. That's it.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
You're welcome. I appreciate the chance to give it.
Absolutely. Mr. Weiss, will you please call the next witness to testify?
William Taylor?
Mr. Taylor, are you there and connected? William Taylor, are you there and connected? You may have to press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hi. Can you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Good afternoon, City Council. My name is William Taylor. I'm currently working at Law School Admission Council. Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity to testify on ways in which City Council can continue to help ensure the vulnerable renters like myself are protected during this economic and health crisis. I'm testifying on the behalf of the reinstatement of the Emergency Housing Protection Act. I am currently renting a 2-bedroom in Mount Airy with my wife and daughter. Before the pandemic, my wife and I fell on hard times. We went to court, mediated an agreement with our landlord to avoid eviction, and began paying accordingly. My wife started a new job in February at a hotel, and we knew we were going to be good for 2020, but COVID had different plans. Like many of our renters and homeowners, we suffered a huge economic loss when the pandemic hit. I was working 2 jobs before, and I lost one as an Uber driver because I wasn't letting anybody in my car. So, and also my wife lost her job at the hotel, and just like millions of people, she didn't receive any unemployment benefits. But by the grace of God, we got through the shutdown and continue to strive forward as numbers continue to grow. I know it's not easy for either side of this mess. Landlords struggles just like tenants. But how much more will it cost to make families homeless? I was very unaware of any of the protections that was really put into place to help the common family like mine during the shutdown. I know I'm not the only tenant with that story. Some of these bills were passed through the Emergency Housing Protection Act. My landlord did not speak to us about any of these laws. They just gave us some documents in writing and pretty much said these, and none of the documents said these are the different tools you have to figure out, what's your landlord or what's your situation.
30 seconds. 30 seconds, please.
Okay. Oh, okay. Pretty much, that's. I don't have too much more to say. I really want to thank you guys for giving us the time to speak on our behalf, and just giving us the floor to express our concerns. And I just really hope, especially around the holiday times, I haven't heard anything about the holidays, that you will find a way for the families to actually get through and just find the extension so people can live and get back to an ordinary life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your testimony. It's really important that we hear from people who are actually going through this. Mr. Weiss, can you call the next witness to testify?
Julie Samaza.
Hi, can you state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Of course. My name is Julie Samaze. Thank you to Council members Gim, Gautier, and Brooks for their work on these bills, and to everyone for their time today. I'm a community leader in the Lower Moyamensing neighborhood and a volunteer with Fifth Square. I emphatically support these amended bills. Nearly half of all Philadelphians are renters. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, our city suffered from an ongoing housing crisis that has impacted our most vulnerable community members. This crisis has only grown more dire, with these same individuals disproportionately bearing the brunt of the pandemic. Though City Council and Mayor Kenney created an eviction diversion program this past spring, there are still thousands of Philadelphians at risk for eviction as we speak. Meanwhile, as we've heard from public health and medical professionals today, the pandemic rages on. I therefore urge City Council and the Mayor to preserve and expand existing funding for eviction prevention and rent subsidies, with priority given to emergency funding for renters. This is the most basic thing we can do for housing security right now during the pandemic, but this work is also crucial in a post-pandemic Philadelphia. Evictions are not only bad for economic growth, they're also bad for community stability. Workers who are evicted are up to 22% more likely to lose their jobs than similarly situated housed people. Furthermore, we know that many people live in substandard and crowded living arrangements, which poses further problems for public health. Fifth Square believes that a pro-dense housing agenda should coexist with pro-tenant consumer protections. Abundant housing should be safe housing. As an organization, Fifth Square is opposed to Society Hill's exclusionary zoning overlay and has supported policy that makes apartments more abundant. We think that must also be paired with robust consumer protections for renters, like the ones council members are proposing with these bills. This keeps tenants in their homes and prevents them from eviction, not only as a result of economic circumstances beyond their control in the middle of a pandemic, but in the future. In closing, I support these bills because I believe housing is a human right with vast implications for public health, economic growth, and community stability. I applaud the City Council members who are working to make housing more plentiful, accessible, and secure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Mr. Weiss, can you please call the next witness to testify?
Yes, Diane Pazzi. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name.
Diane, are you there? If you might be on mute. You have to press *6 to unmute yourself. Okay.
Hi, this is Diane Posey, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify today. While I agree with everything that's been stated so far, I have a unique situation. I own several properties in the West Philadelphia area. I don't live in the Philadelphia area, so I also have a management company that assists me with managing the properties. I want to first say that my management company has been excellent in providing all the information that the tenants need to get assistance. In fact, I was informed of a particular situation today where a tenant needed assistance and everything has been provided for them. But I also have a situation where a tenant stopped paying their rent 2 to 3 months prior to COVID. And we went through the court system and we were at the very last step for the sheriff lockout when the courts were shut down. At this point, there's probably close to $11,000 owed to me. The tenant does not reply to any correspondence, any phone calls. We provide him with all the same information that we give to all the tenants, and he's living there for free, and I believe taking advantage of the system. So in my particular situation where the next step was the sheriff lockout, I feel that my case should be heard. And so that's really all that I have to say about that. But I agree with everything else that everyone else has said. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Jiva Mulhill, are you on and connected?
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, I'm here.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Jiva Mulhill. I'm a shop steward with Unite Here 274 at the airport and a member of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. Pre-COVID, I was bartending at the Philadelphia International Airport. Me and almost all of my coworkers were laid off because of COVID. We all had to file for unemployment. And I worked on our union hotline, helping people access unemployment and PUA. Many of us were in very, very desperate situations. We were cut off from our job. Money wasn't coming through the government. And we couldn't pick up work anywhere else without huge health risks. Even now, a lot of my coworkers are still out of work. And even the ones who are at work, the tips and the money they were making are not the same. When the 600 expired, many of us fell into debt again after just finding our feet. I know a lot of people who are in really, really desperate situations and on the verge of eviction right now. And I'm calling to support the Emergency Housing Protection Act because it's a lifeline from a public health crisis, because people are very, very close to losing their homes and being on the street in a time when having a home is some of the best protection for the rest of the community to stay safe from COVID and for people to be able to quarantine.
30 seconds.
Yeah, the eviction mediation program is really important, especially when people are applying for things like rental assistance. The time to figure out the funds that they need and to support each other. And then I also, because of the situation with the 600, and because people are like somewhat going back to work, some of us still aren't, and some of us are in places, are back to work but not making the same amount of money, the ability to not be crippled by late fees is really, really important.
Please do wrap up your testimony. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you so much. Mr. Weiss, will you please call the next witness to testify?
Samantha Stone Burton.
Samantha, are you there and connected? You may have to press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi, Samantha.
Hello, my name is Samantha Stone Burton. I'm a warehouse worker and community leader. I organize with One Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for providing me an opportunity to testify. I'm here today as a displaced mother of 4. I represent many mothers across Philadelphia who are facing insecure housing, including my own mother. She's going through the process of eviction right now. And I am scared that in weeks to come, she'll be mishandled by landlord-tenant court and become homeless. Who will help me protect my mother, who is an elderly tenant? We need these protections now. Winter is coming, and we need you to secure the city before, during, and after the winter season to avoid more deaths in the Black community. Take our lives seriously. In the Bible, Matthew 24 quotes, "Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath." No one should have to figure out where they are going to live during a global pandemic, especially not during the coldest months of the year. Protect us from eviction through a reinstatement of the Emergency Housing Protections Act. Passing this act could help my mother to have a repayment plan, could waive fees that are accruing, and help to protect her from eviction. And it's necessary. We know this already. My story represents thousands of people's stories. I've been here to share my personal story of displacement before. And now I'm back to share my mom's. I hope that I don't have to come back in a few months to share another one to convince this council that we need housing protections in the poorest big city in the country. During the pandemic, this city had one of the highest evictions rates before March. And we don't need to increase it. We need to make history and show that the Trump and nation what it means to protect people now. Pass these bills for grandmothers, mothers, and children. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Weiss, can you call the next witness to testify?
Suzanne Ann Stromquist.
Hello.
Suzanne, can you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon.
Sorry.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Susan Stromquist, and I've been a landlord in West Philadelphia for 8 years. I value my tenants, my neighbors, my community, and as a landlord, I support the EHPA because this crisis is not over. Renters throughout the city are still facing unprecedented levels of unemployment due to factors completely out of their control. They're still hustling every day to meet the most basic necessities, and people of color continue to be the most affected. The people who live and rent in the city are the same people who create the culture and embody the spirit that make the city a place where people want to live and rent. Let's honor their resilience and protect those most vulnerable. As we persevere through this collective and we hope once in a century emergency, basic human rights such as housing security are more important than our immediate bottom line. It is up to us as a city to get through this together
And now more than ever, we need to continue to show up for each other. Please do pass extending the Emergency Housing Protection Act, ordinances 200, 414, 420, and 421. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Weiss, can you please call the next witness to testify?
Lori Fulton.
Lori, are you there and connected?
Yes, I'm here.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Lori Fulton. I'm a singer and voiceover actor. And I've proudly called Philadelphia my home, and I've been here and a renter since 1981. I work in the entertainment industry, and it's been completely decimated by the COVID-19, and it's an industry that has no clear future. The coronavirus's deadly impact has permanently closed theaters, venues, restaurants, and canceled or postponed events to 2021 with no guarantee that in 2021 the world will have righted itself. My other sources of income have been furloughed. I worked as a part-time employee, but my employer contracted the coronavirus in late January 2020 and closed his business. I applied for rental assistance for phase 1 in May, and my landlord rejected the application. In July, I applied for phase 2. The application was accepted by my landlord. But because my landlord has not received any of the money from the rental assistance program, my landlord has continuously behaved in a manner that makes me very uncomfortable with sending me notices, billing of recurring rental payments, and that they are trying to have conversations with me about eviction, in spite of getting the notice that our application has been accepted. The extension of the moratorium is crucial for Philadelphians. The Emergency Housing Protection Act and the bills 414, 420, 421 will give Philadelphians a chance to gain some financial footing while we wait for the world to change. Thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you so much. Mr. Weiss, can you please call the next witness to testify?
Tamir Younger.
Tamir, are you there and connected?
Yes, I'm here and connected.
Can you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Tamir Younger. I'm a community leader and an organizer with 1PA. Thank you very much for providing me with an opportunity to testify. I wanted to testify on behalf of the extension of the Emergency Housing Act. I've been a renter in West Philadelphia for about 4 years. Due to COVID-19, my partner and I are both out of work. And with the minimal support that our government has provided, we've exhausted all of our savings, and there's no room to rebuild it or for.
Are you there? I'm having a hard time hearing you. I don't know if other people can hear.
Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you a little better now.
Okay. I've been a renter in West Philadelphia for about 4 years. Due to COVID-19, my partner and I are both out of work, and with the minimal amount of support our government has given us, we've exhausted all of our savings, and we don't really have room for a big expense to come up. Like I said, it's been about 4 years since I've been living here. I've seen my landlord twice. I saw him for the third time 2 weeks ago when he came to my house. I wasn't sure what he was doing there because he lived in Jersey and he never popped up. Of course, I was afraid when he came and trying to figure out what he was doing there. He came to tell me that our building was going to be sold and that people would either need to prepare for rent increases or to be evicted. 2 weeks later, I'm still wondering how long I have to be in my place. Will it be an eviction? Will it be a rent increase? And how are we supposed to deal with the extra money while we're both out of work due to the pandemic? Either way, my landlord basically served us an eviction notice. So we either have to leave or we have to get our rent increased, neither of which we can afford. I'm testifying because I need another option And I need my representatives to think about me and all the people who are forced into new uncertain situations who've had problems already that are just amplified by the pandemic. We can't afford to be forced out of our homes at any time, but especially not now. Please consider us and pass the extension of the Emergency Housing Protection Act in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Mr. Weiss, can you call the next witness to testify?
Stephanie Dornbosch.
Stephanie, are you there and connected?
I'm here.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Stephanie, if you could please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Committee Chair Gaudier, Vice Chair Jones, and committee members. I'm Stephanie Dornbosch, an attorney and program manager at TURN, the Tenant Union Representative Network. My colleagues and I appear before this committee frequently in support of tenants' rights measures, and we would like to thank you for all the work that you've done in that area. But the Emergency Housing Protection Act isn't fundamentally about tenants' rights. These bills are addressing the public health and safety in the middle of an enormous crisis. If they're enacted, they'll help keep you and me and everyone else in our community, including homeowners and landlords, safer from the coronavirus. The only way that's going to work is if it's very clear to both tenants and landlords that people cannot be put out of their homes, and for the reasons that other advocates and attorneys have stated today, if it's as broadly applicable as possible. An effective moratorium will also stop landlords from taking any steps towards displacement at all until the moratorium is over. Tenants who have received 10-day or 30-day notices from the landlord call us in a panic because they assume their landlord can just lock them out at the end of that notice period. And so many of them just get out of there as quickly as possible without waiting for a court hearing. So if we're trying to prevent displacement, if we're trying to prevent people from being out on the streets and in shelters and living in their cars and crowding into the homes of friends and family, we have to hit pause on the entire eviction process. And the thing is, a lot of tenants want to move out if their landlord doesn't want them there. But to minimize the public health risk of moving and displacement, they need to be able to do that on their own time so they can find a safe place to stay. And TURN is, just to be clear, we're not an anti-landlord organization. We don't want to see small landlords lose their properties. Some really do need money to survive, and we want to see as much rental assistance as possible go out to those landlords quickly.
30
Keeping
seconds.
Communities together. All right, thank you. Keeping communities together is good for both tenants and landlords, and we are all in this pandemic together. But one thing that we're hearing from so many tenants right now is that it's not always about the rent money. We have tenants calling whose landlords are refusing to apply for rental assistance, or the tenants are paid up on their rent, but their landlords want them out anyway. And in this public health crisis, there's no room for that kind of business as usual approach when it could deprive people of having a roof over their heads and running water. Everyone's health and well-being is at risk right now, and we need strong leadership to keep people safe. So we hope you'll vote for all 3 Emergency Housing Protection Act bills today, and especially on the full moratorium. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mr. Weiss, will you please call the next witness to testify?
There are no other witnesses to testify.
Okay. Councilmember Kim, I know you wanted to make some comments.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for all of the individuals, the testifiers, the scientists, the researchers, the moms and grandmothers, workers, property owners, organizers, legal advocates, our administration who came forward and told us a fuller story. Sometimes we don't always know everything that people experience. We can't possibly know. They show that there's always more to understand and more for us to learn as we do the difficult work of legislating in this area. As the committee goes into deliberations, I just want to extend my gratitude also to the colleagues who stayed on and listened and considered a wide variety of testimony. The bill, I think, that is the most challenging for everybody is the one that reinstates the eviction moratorium. It is a public health bill, plain and simple. It's not a bill that tries to draw a line between who deserves to be evicted and who does not. We made a conscious decision last spring when we, unanimously passed the bill that we could not afford to limit who is protected because it dismissed the reality of poverty, of biases and obstacles with our courts, challenges with education and outreach and information sharing with landlords and tenants, and because it undermined the public health goal of the bill. There are multiple programs that assist individuals facing a COVID-related hardship right now. There's diversion, there's rent subsidies, and more should be created. But the question before us is about whether the public health of our most vulnerable Philadelphians, and that includes our most vulnerable communities, is more important than when exactly someone fell on hard times. Philadelphians face hard times. They face poverty. They struggled to pay the rent pre-COVID. This bill, as it stands, does not turn our back on them right now as COVID is on the rise. There was a discussion today, and have been in the past, that there might be unexpected consequences or unintended consequences of reinstating a moratorium. But we actually know what they are. This is not a mystery. We know what the gaps are. We have 2,000 households who fall outside of traditional COVID protections that are established by a random date that we set of March 1st. And we need to get resources to them and their landlords. We know that our courts have largely not been equal partners with us, helping inform tenants of their rights, for example, ensuring that landlords are communicating and doing their due diligence. Reforms need to happen there. We need to ensure and promise that no landlord, especially a small landlord, will be foreclosed upon. And indeed, we've actually made a ton of progress through the courts on this front already. We need resources from the state, from the federal government. No one here is asking landlords to absorb all of this on their own. But the actual unintended consequences occur if we let the floodgates go in the middle of this pandemic. 2,000 evictions are households, not people. They could be 2, 3, or 4 times the number of people who are impacted. And as Dr. Stanford and others have said, we as a city are not prepared. There are children who are out of school, women, elderly, the disabled, and many others who are deeply vulnerable, not just to eviction, but to health and housing disparities that land them in the courts in the first place. Last spring, this body took bold action, and I firmly believe that our numbers have not been the worst of the worst because of it. I don't think we can underscore just how much we've been shielded from the worst of the worst because we have held off on evictions. It's not a matter of winning or losing, it's a matter of the public health. And when we are finally through this horror, I'm asking us to say, what will we as a council be able to say that we did? This ball lands in our court. The federal courts have determined that we have the right, the responsibility even, to regulate evictions in this pandemic. Will we say that we decided on amendments that appease certain groups, that quite honestly did not advertise diversion, are confused about existing programs, but have proudly touted their service to help expedite evicting people from their homes? Will we say that we did something because it was just the middle ground, regardless of what doctors, legal advocates, and researchers tell us? Or will we say that we did what was just, what was right, what science told us, what was safe during the most unprecedented public health emergency of our lifetime? Will we say that we found alternatives for people? Or will we say there's simply nothing at all we can do to help you because you were at the wrong time? I've been proud to be part of a council that understands the importance of home. None of us is home until all of us is. And I ask this committee to consider the full nature and the testimony that was presented in this hearing, and that we as a council body can focus on getting people and landlords the resources they need, rather than debate who does and does not deserve to be at home right now. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, and I am so sorry, but I think we missed one last witness. Sterling Johnson, are you there and connected? Sterling? You might have to push *6 to unmute yourself. Sterling?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
All right. My name is Sterling Johnson. I'm a lawyer, housing and homeless advocate. I've been here several times. I support Emergency Housing Protection Act and the bills that go along with it. We need, specifically, the eviction moratorium needs to be extended until December 31st. And what we're talking about here is the direct intervention because the harm is people being evicted. for us, for the work that I do generally, but specifically has been around people that have been unhoused. We had a protest encampment. I personally interacted with about 350 people that have been in the encampment that had many different stories. Many people have been in Center City experiencing homelessness for a long time, but a lot of other people, I would say probably a third of the people, this is their first time experiencing homelessness. So it's very important to see what is happening right now for everybody. I just want to, talk about two issues. The first issue is the fact that, we took it very seriously that, and because we have people like Jen Bennett and Occupy PHA that have experienced DHS and Child Protective Services taking away people's children, if you evict people on the street, it puts their children at risk of being separated from their families. Like, understand that is what you're doing when you're saying, let evictions go forward. That is what happens. And we've seen DHS search for the children so they can grab them away from their parents. And that is what we cannot have. We have to stop that. Another thing that I've seen has been people in recovery upon an eviction. That is when the devolution happens, and that is what causes death. Especially people that have been doing well, but if something happens, especially like COVID, with all the forward movement goes south. So I just want us to think about those two issues. They're very near and dear to my heart. And everybody in the camps that have been there are all people that are just trying their best every single day. So, and thank you, Councilmember Gim and Brooks and Gauthier for this forum. Councilmember Gim really summed it up. I'm sorry that she wasn't the last word on this. So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for all of your work in advocacy, Sterling. Okay. Is there anyone else present in this hearing whose name we have failed to call and that wishes to offer testimony on any of the bills being considered today? Hearing none, I want to thank all the panels and witnesses for your participation today. We value your opinions. I now invite all panels and witnesses to please disconnect from the meeting before we go into our public meeting. We will now pause the proceedings briefly as multiple participants leave the hearing. This concludes the public hearing of the committee. We will now recess briefly until 1:40 p.m., at which time we will convene the public meeting to consider the action to be taken on the bills before this committee today. Thank you so much. Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is a continued public hearing of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless. Having no further testimony today and not having a quorum for a public meeting, this concludes this business of the committee for today. I thank everyone who testified today, and I thank everyone who listened in from home. This hearing is now adjourned. Have a good evening.